Have you ever woken up in the morning and found yourself paralyzed for 10 minutes trying to choose what to wear? Not that paralysis of being in a rush, but that strange feeling that among dozens of options in your closet, none seem right. You open the food delivery app, and after 20 minutes scrolling through hundreds of restaurants, you end up ordering the same thing as always. You sit down to choose a movie on Netflix, spend an hour browsing through thousands of titles, and in the end, give up and go to sleep. If you've lived through this, you've experienced one of the cruelest paradoxes of our era. The more freedom of choice we have, the more enslaved by those choices we become. This is a prison we built with our own hands, brick by brick, each brick an additional option that promised us more happiness and delivered more anxiety. The great irony is that our medieval ancestors, who had perhaps 3 career options, 2 types of clothing, and a single dinner dish, may have been freer than us, who have access to infinite possibilities, but discover that infinite possibilities can be a sophisticated form of torture. For thousands of years, humanity dreamed of freedom. Our ancestors looked to the horizon and imagined a world where they could freely choose their destinies, their professions, their partners, their beliefs. Slaves dreamed of liberation. Serfs dreamed of escaping the feudal lord's land. Women dreamed of choosing their own lives. Freedom was humanity's purest dream, the ultimate goal of all social and political progress. Every revolution, every liberation movement, every struggle for human rights had as its final objective to give us more choices, more options, more possible paths, and we succeeded. Oh, how we succeeded. Today we have more freedoms than any previous generation in human history. We can choose our careers among thousands of professions that didn't even exist 50 years ago. We can travel anywhere in the world in a matter of hours. We can instantly connect with billions of people. We can access virtually all human knowledge with a few taps on the screen. We can customize every aspect of our lives, from breakfast to our romantic partners, whom we now find through algorithms that offer us millions of options. We conquered freedom so completely that our ancestors could barely comprehend the universe of possibilities at our disposal. But then something strange happened. On the way to this paradise of free choice, we discovered that having infinite options didn't make us infinitely happy. On the contrary, psychological studies began to reveal that people with more options often feel more anxious, more dissatisfied, and more regretful of their decisions. Psychologist Barry Schwartz documented this phenomenon he called the paradox of choice, demonstrating that supermarkets with 60 types of jam leave consumers more frustrated than supermarkets with only 3 options. When we have 3 options, we choose one and move on. When we have 60 options, we become paralyzed by the possibility of making the wrong choice. And even after choosing, we remain tormented thinking about all the alternatives we rejected. This discovery was like a slap in the face to 3 centuries of Enlightenment philosophy. It turns out that more freedom doesn't always result in more happiness. In fact, it can result in more suffering. Choice, which should have been our liberation, became our new prison. And this prison has very peculiar characteristics. It has no visible bars or armed guards. Instead, it imprisons us with chains made of infinite possibilities. Every morning, we wake up not to the comforting certainty of a pre-established routine, but to the crushing burden of having to decide everything again, which career to pursue among thousands of possibilities, which course to take among tens of thousands available online, which city to choose to live in when we can work remotely from anywhere, which person to choose to relate to when apps give us access to millions of profiles, which personality to adopt when we can reinvent our identity on social media at any moment, which belief to embrace when we have access to all the world's philosophies and religions. Each of these decisions carries the terrible weight of all the unchosen alternatives. Every path taken is haunted by the ghosts of all the paths we decided not to take. And how do we know we're making the right choices? How can we be sure that our chosen life is better than the dozens of other lives we could be living? We can't. And this uncertainty becomes a constant anxiety that accompanies us in every decision, no matter how small. Digital technology not only multiplied our options, but made visible the alternative lives we could be living. Before, when you chose to become a teacher in a small town, you simply were a teacher in a small town. You didn't find out daily about the glamorous lives your schoolmates were living in distant metropolises. You didn't receive constant updates about alternative careers you could have pursued. Today, through social media, we are constantly bombarded with visual evidence of all the lives we're not living. We see posts from the friend who moved to Bali and works as a digital nomad. We see photos of the former colleague who became a multinational executive. We see stories of the acquaintance who dropped everything and became a chef. Each of these alternative lives we see on screens is a painful reminder of a choice we didn't make, a path we didn't take. And since these alternative lives always seem more interesting and fulfilling than our own life seen from the inside, we develop a syndrome we could call chronic envy of possibilities. We become addicted to imagining how our life would be different if we had made other choices, and this constant fantasy with parallel lives prevents us from being fully present in the life we actually chose to live. But the trap becomes even more sophisticated when we realize that many of our free choices are actually the product of algorithmic manipulation. The same systems that offer us infinite options are simultaneously shaping which options we see and how we see them. Instagram's algorithm decides which alternative lives you'll see today to feed your dissatisfaction. YouTube's algorithm decides which alternative careers will seem more attractive. The dating app's algorithm decides what type of partner will seem available. Google's algorithm decides which online courses will appear when you search for career change. In other words, our sense of having infinite choices is carefully cultivated by systems that profit by keeping our attention through constant dissatisfaction. The more dissatisfied we are with our current choices, the more time we spend online looking for alternatives, the more ads we see, the more money these systems make. The free choice industry has also become the perpetual dissatisfaction industry. We are free to choose, but only among the options that algorithms decide to show us, and these options are selected not to make us happier, but to keep us more engaged. What makes this manipulation particularly pernicious is that it operates through perfect simulation of authentic freedom. Algorithms don't tell us directly what to do, as traditional forms of authoritarian control would. Instead, they create informational environments that make certain choices seem more attractive, more urgent, more necessary for our personal fulfillment. They don't prohibit us from considering certain options. They simply make those options disappear from our field of vision. They don't force us to buy certain products. They just make those products appear at the exact moment when we're most vulnerable to buying them. They don't oblige us to adopt certain lifestyles. They just bombard us with carefully selected evidence that people similar to us are adopting these lifestyles and becoming happier, more fulfilled, more successful. It's a form of control that works by amplifying our own desires and insecurities, making us feel like we're making completely autonomous decisions when we are actually reacting to stimuli carefully designed to produce specific responses. The sophistication of these systems has reached a point where they can predict our future choices more accurately than we can ourselves. Through analysis of behavioral patterns from millions of similar users, algorithms develop predictive models that know what kind of person you'll likely become before you even know it yourself. They know what products you'll buy, what career you'll pursue, what kind of person you'll choose to relate to, what political beliefs you'll adopt, what existential crises you'll face at different life stages. And then they use this knowledge to create environments that accelerate your transformation in whatever direction is most profitable for the platforms. If the data indicates you'll likely go through a midlife crisis at 40, you'll start receiving content about career changes and radical adventures at 38. If patterns suggest you'll become interested in spirituality after a romantic breakup, the first suggestions for content about meditation and self-knowledge will appear right after you change your relationship status. We live in a reality where our existential crises are anticipated and monetized, where our search for authenticity is captured and directed toward commercially useful channels before we even begin to question who we really are. This phenomenon creates a paradoxical situation where we feel simultaneously unique and totally predictable. Algorithms make us feel special by personalizing every experience to our specific tastes. But this personalization is only possible because we're so predictable that our preferences can be anticipated by machines. The feeling of being understood by algorithms often satisfies us more than being understood by real people, because algorithms never judge us, never contradict us, never challenge us to grow beyond our established patterns. They simply offer us more refined and sophisticated versions of the same types of experience they already know please us. Thus, the technology that promised to expand our horizons often ends up creating increasingly comfortable and increasingly narrow bubbles where our freedom of choice is reduced to the freedom to choose between subtle variations of the same basic theme we've already demonstrated we prefer in the past. The result is that we develop a neurotic relationship with our own decisions. Every choice we make comes accompanied by an inner voice that whispers that perhaps there was a better option we didn't consider. Every path we follow is haunted by the suspicion that we could have followed a more rewarding path. Every relationship is contaminated by the fantasy that there's a more compatible person somewhere in the infinite possibilities of apps. Every job is poisoned by the idea that there is a more fulfilling career we haven't discovered yet. Every city where we live seems less interesting than all the other cities we see on social media. This is the cruelest of prisons because its chains are made of possibilities and its guards are our own dreams of a better life. We become trapped not by what is denied to us, but by the excess of what is offered to us. And the most tragic thing is that this prison is almost impossible to perceive because it disguises itself as total freedom. For most of human history, people had their identities and destinies largely determined by the circumstances of birth. You were born a peasant, you died a peasant. Born noble, died noble. Your life options were limited. But this limitation also brought a peculiar form of freedom. The freedom of not having to constantly choose everything. There was a clear structure, a defined social role, crystal clear expectations about what constituted a well-lived life within those circumstances. The medieval peasant didn't wake up every morning wondering if he should quit farming and become a merchant. He simply woke up and did the work his social position demanded. There wasn't the modern anxiety of choice, because there wasn't choice in the modern sense of the word. And while this might sound limiting by contemporary standards, it also meant that people could focus their mental energy not on constantly deciding what to do with their lives, but on how to do well what their lives demanded. There was a brutal clarity, but still a clarity about what your place in the world was and what was expected of you. The transition to modernity traded that structural certainty for the anguish of self-determination. When we dissolved the traditional structures that defined identities and destinies, we created a vacuum that each individual must now fill through constant personal choices. You're no longer born with a ready-made identity. You need to build an identity through thousands of decisions about education, career, relationships, lifestyle, beliefs, values, even personality. And this is a Herculean task for which no one adequately prepares us. We learn to value freedom of choice as the supreme good, but no one teaches us how to deal psychologically with the weight of having to constantly choose everything. The result is that many of us become overwhelmed by the responsibility of self-creating our lives and begin to feel an unconscious nostalgia for simpler and more deterministic structures. This explains the growing appeal of movements that offer absolute certainties and clearly defined roles, even when these certainties come at the cost of the individual freedom we theoretically value. The deepest irony is that our pursuit of absolute freedom often leads us to more subtle, but no less real, forms of slavery. When all external structures are removed and we are left with the responsibility of self-designing our lives, many of us unconsciously seek new forms of structure and guidance. And these new structures often come disguised as free choices. You choose to follow an influencer who dictates how to live. You choose to embrace a lifestyle prescribed by some online community. You choose to follow a productivity methodology that structures every minute of your day. You choose to adopt a life philosophy that eliminates the need to think critically about your decisions. In each case, the apparent choice masks a real abdication of the responsibility of self-determination. We trade the terrifying freedom of inventing our own lives for the comforting security of following pre-established scripts. But we make this trade through the discourse of free choice, which allows us to maintain the illusion of autonomy. Thus, our era of maximum freedom also becomes an era of voluntary conformism, where people freely choose to abdicate their freedom. The modern economy has organized itself completely around exploiting this psychological vulnerability. Entire industries exist to capitalize on our anxiety about choices and our nostalgia for simpler structures. The self-help industry sells the promise of systems that will simplify your life decisions. The coaching industry sells mentors who will make decisions for you, disguised as guidance for your own decisions. The wellness industry sells rigid routines, disguised as paths to self-realization. The productivity industry sells methodologies that structure your time so detailed they eliminate the need to decide what to do moment by moment. The relationship industry sells algorithms that promise to find your perfect match, eliminating the anxiety of having to meet people and discover compatibility through the slow and uncertain process of human experience. The career industry sells personality tests that promise to reveal your true vocation, as if there were a predetermined career waiting to be discovered rather than built through trial and error. Each of these industries profits by selling temporary relief from the anxiety of free choice. But since this relief can never be permanent in a society that demands constant self-determination, they guarantee an infinite market of consumers searching for the next solution to the burden of being free. I want to pause for a moment to ask you directly, when was the last time you felt truly comfortable with an important decision you made without imagining whether you could have made a better choice? Maybe it's rare, or maybe it's never happened in your adult life. You're not alone in this experience. Millions of people today live with this constant unease about their choices, this feeling that there's always a slightly better life we could be living if we just knew how to make the right decisions. If this feeling resonates with you, share in the comments. I feel this unease about my choices when your experience can help others realize they're not alone in this modern struggle against the weight of absolute freedom. Sometimes, naming this experience is the first step toward finding healthier ways to relate to it. The neurochemistry of the human brain did not evolve to handle infinite options. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in small groups with relatively predictable environments and limited choices. The brain developed decision-making systems optimized for environments where options were few and the consequences of choices were clear and immediate. When you saw a predator, you had two basic options: fight or flight. When you found food, the decision was simple: eat or save. When you encountered a potential partner, the relevant variables were limited and easily accessible. The decision-making system we inherited from these ancestors works well when options are few and variables are simple, but collapses when bombarded with complex choice scenarios involving hundreds of interdependent variables and consequences that extend decades into the future. When we try to use this ancestral system to decide between 200 college majors or 1,000 career options or thousands of potential partners, it simply crashes. The result is the choice paralysis many experience and the chronic anxiety that accompanies the feeling of constantly making important decisions with mental tools inadequate for the task. This mismatch between our ancestral mental architecture and the demands of modern life creates a phenomenon we could call decision fatigue, where the mere act of constantly choosing between multiple options dramatically depletes our mental energy. Neurological studies show that the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for complex decision-making, consumes a disproportionate amount of glucose when forced to process many choices in sequence. It's literally as if each decision burns mental fuel, and in a society that forces us to make hundreds of micro decisions per day, from which app to open when we wake up to which series to watch before sleeping, we arrive at the end of the day mentally exhausted, not from having done something productive, but simply from having constantly chosen between unnecessarily multiple options. This fatigue is not a luxury of privileged people, but a reality that affects everyone, from the executive deciding between business strategies to the family mother choosing between dozens of cereal brands at the supermarket. The democracy of infinite choices has become an equal tyranny for all social levels. The situation becomes even more absurd when we realize that many of the options among which we spend mental energy deciding are artificially created to generate the illusion of personalization without offering real substantial differences. The industry discovered that consumers feel more satisfied when they believe they're making personalized choices, even when these choices are cosmetic. That's why we have 30 flavors of toothpaste that are essentially the same product with small irrelevant variations, 200 smartphone models that do fundamentally the same functions, 1,000 online courses that promise to teach the same skills with slightly different methodologies. We spend precious time and mental energy distinguishing between differences that were deliberately created to be small enough not to matter, but large enough to give us the feeling that we're exercising our autonomy. It's a cruel form of theater where we play the role of free consumers while companies profit both from selling the products and from selling the feeling that we are free to choose between them. More disturbing still is how this excess of trivial choices distracts us from really important decisions we could be making about how to organize our societies. While we spend 40 minutes deciding what to order on Uber Eats, we don't dedicate 40 minutes thinking about how our city's public policies affect our quality of life, while we exhaustively research which online course to take to improve our career. We don't research how educational systems could be reformed to work better for everyone. While we obsessively compare different meditation apps, we don't think critically about how our society could be reorganized to be less stressful from the start. The excess of individual choices functioned as a smokescreen that prevents us from seeing that many of the problems we try to solve through personal choices are actually systemic problems that require collective solutions. individual freedom of choice became a substitute for collective freedom of social self-determination. And this was one of the most ingenious tricks of neoliberal ideology, convincing us that we can solve all problems through consumer choices, when in fact many problems require political choices that can only be made collectively. Besides this, the human brain has an evolutionary tendency to focus more intensely on losses than on gains, a bias that psychologists call loss aversion. In the era of limited choices, this bias protected us from unnecessary risks. It was better to be overly cautious about losing what you had than to risk everything for uncertain gains. But in the era of infinite possibilities, this same tendency becomes a source of torment. Every choice we make is not just a decision about what to gain, but a decision about what to lose. When you choose a career, you're simultaneously rejecting hundreds of other possible careers. When you choose a partner, you're rejecting thousands of other potential partners. And since the brain is programmed to feel losses more intensely than gains, every choice comes accompanied by a sensation of multiple loss that can be psychologically devastating. You may be living an objectively good life, but feel chronically dissatisfied because your mind is focused not on what you gained through your choices, but on everything you lost by not making all the other possible choices. This situation becomes even more complicated when we consider that our perception of available options is being constantly manipulated by algorithms designed to maximize engagement and not well-being. The recommendation systems that determine what we see online are not programmed to show us the options that would make us happier in the long term, but rather the options that will keep us connected to platforms longer in the short term. This means we are systematically exposed to exaggerated and romanticized versions of alternative lives, alternative careers, alternative relationships. The algorithm won't show you the mundane and frustrating aspects of the influencer's life who travels the world, but only the peak moments that generate more engagement. It won't show you the financial difficulties and uncertainty of the successful entrepreneur, but only the final glamorous results. It won't show you the conflicts and compromises necessary in relationships that seem perfect online, but only the curated moments that generate more likes. The result is that we develop completely unrealistic expectations about how alternative lives are lived, which makes our own real life, with all its normal complexities and imperfections, seem inferior in comparison. Paradoxically, the more options we theoretically have available, the more conformist we become in practice. This happens because the excess of choices creates such intense anxiety that we unconsciously seek shortcuts to reduce this anxiety. And the most available shortcuts are to follow what everyone else is doing or follow what some authority recommends. Thus, in an era where we supposedly can completely personalize our lives, we observe a strange homogenization of lifestyles, especially among younger people. Everyone wants to be unique in exactly the same way. Everyone follows the same alternative career trends. Everyone adopts the same minimalist lifestyles. Everyone embraces the same self-realization philosophies. The illusion of mass personalization masks a reality of mass conformism because people overwhelmed with infinite options naturally gravitate towards solutions that diminish the cognitive load of constant decision-making, and these solutions often involve following pre-established models that are popular precisely because they reduce choice anxiety. The deeper question is not how to have more options, but how to develop a healthier relationship with the options we already have. And this requires a fundamental change in how we understand freedom and choice. Instead of seeing freedom as maximizing available options, we can begin to see it as the ability to make conscious choices and then be at peace with those choices. Instead of valuing the theoretical possibility of being able to change everything at any moment, we can value the ability to commit deeply to the choices we make. This doesn't mean passively accepting any situation, but means distinguishing between changes that would really improve our life experience and changes that are just fantasist escapism from the responsibility of living deeply the choices we've already made. True freedom may lie not in having infinite options, but in knowing when to stop looking for options and start living intensely the possibilities we've already chosen to explore. Traditional cultures developed rituals and social structures that help people commit deeply to their life choices. Rites of passage marked important transitions and created a sense of finality that made it harder to constantly question decisions already made. Community structures provided external validation for roles and life choices, reducing the need for constant validation through comparison with alternatives. Philosophical and spiritual traditions offered frameworks for understanding that a well-lived life doesn't come from maximizing options, but from cultivating wisdom, deep relationships, and purpose within any set of circumstances. We don't need to return to these traditional structures, which often came with their own forms of oppression, but we can learn from them about how to create psychological stability amid constant change. In our era, we need to consciously develop what we could call arts of voluntary limitation. This includes learning to establish healthy limits on how many options we consider in different areas of life. It means developing clear criteria for decision-making that allow us to choose quickly and move forward instead of ruminating infinitely about alternatives. It means practicing the discipline of stopping consumption of content that feeds our fantasy about alternative lives and focusing our attention on the life we're actually living. It means cultivating deep relationships that help us feel rooted in something real instead of always seeking the next experience or opportunity. And perhaps most importantly, it means developing a personal philosophy that helps us distinguish between changes that serve our real growth and changes that are just ways to avoid the responsibility of committing deeply to anything. But these individual solutions, while necessary, are not sufficient to face a problem that is fundamentally systemic. The epidemic of choice anxiety is not just a matter of personal development, but a symptom of how we organize our society and our economy. We need to begin questioning whether a system that artificially multiplies options to generate profit through constant dissatisfaction is compatible with human well-being in the long term. This means rethinking everything from basic education, which could teach decision-making skills and tolerance for limitation, to urban policies which could create environments that facilitate healthy choices instead of multiplying unnecessary options. It means questioning an economic model that treats the multiplication of choices as automatic progress, regardless of the impact on people's real quality of life. The social reorganization necessary to solve this problem would involve recognizing that not every choice is an improvement and that well-designed systems often work better when they consciously limit available options to optimize for specific outcomes instead of maximizing abstract variety. Cities that intelligently restrict transportation options to prioritize walking and public transport often offer better quality of life than cities that maximize all possible locomotion options. Educational systems that offer well-structured learning paths often produce better results than systems that offer infinite possibilities for personalization. Work environments that establish clear protocols for communication and decision-making are often more productive and less stressful than environments that maximize flexibility and autonomy in all micro decisions. The challenge lies in distinguishing between oppressive limitations that serve power and liberating limitations that serve human well-being. The former are imposed from outside and benefit some at the expense of others. The latter are chosen collectively and benefit everyone through reducing unnecessary cognitive load. The crucial difference lies in the process. Liberating limitations emerge from democratic deliberation about how to organize collective life to maximize human flourishing, while oppressive limitations are imposed by those who benefit from the status quo. Thus, the solution to excess freedom is not less freedom, but a more mature form of freedom that includes the collective capacity to consciously choose our limitations. The future of human freedom may depend on our ability to redefine what freedom means in an era of infinite possibilities. If we continue defining freedom as maximizing options, we will continue creating societies that produce chronic anxiety and perpetual dissatisfaction. But if we can evolve our understanding of freedom to include the ability to consciously choose our limitations and then flourish within those limitations, we can create a human life experience that is simultaneously free and satisfying. This requires courage because it means giving up the fantasy that we can have everything and be anything, and accepting that a well-lived life inevitably involves choosing some possibilities and rejecting others. But this courage can free us in a deeper way than any multiplication of options could achieve. It can free us from the tyranny of always wanting to be somewhere else, being someone else, living another life. If these reflections have touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. This struggle with the weight of absolute freedom is one of the most common experiences of our era, although it's rarely discussed openly. By subscribing to this channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical and psychological challenges of living authentically in the modern world. Each week, we meet here to explore together the big questions that define our era and to seek not just understanding, but also wiser and freer ways to exist amid the complexities of contemporary life. This is not just a channel, but a space for collective reflection about how we can live with more wisdom, more peace, and more real purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented by the infinite possibilities it offers. Join us in this continuous journey of discovery. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to transform the burden of absolute freedom into the blessing of a consciously chosen and deeply lived life.
Hello, Yuval. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
This is
good to be here.
Real pleasure to be here with Yuval. He is not only a great historian, as you all know, he is a very kind man. In the green room, among his many duties, signing books, answering my questions about Israeli politics, he also helped read a bedtime story to my 10-year-old, who is a huge fan of Unstoppable Us. So thank you, Yuval.
It's my pleasure.
All right, so what I want to do in this book is I want to go through some of the history, some of the stories you tell. I'm going to ask you a few questions about characters you introduce, the ideas they represent. We'll go through some of the arguments you make about history, about AI, and about democracy. And then I hope there'll be some time at the end to go through some of your apocalyptic thought experiments. Does that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I have a whole series of questions, several thousand that people have sent in. I appreciate that. We'll get to those as well. First question. What is that bird?
Oh, that's a difficult question. It's a pigeon.
I mean, thank you. Oh, geez. What does the bird represent, and why is it on the cover of your book about the history of the world?
Well, for two main reasons. First of all, in Hebrew, there is no difference between a pigeon and a dove. I know that in English, in the English-speaking world, pigeons are often called rats with wings, whereas doves are thought of as these white angels of peace. But in Hebrew, they are the same. And there are no doves in the Middle East. Maybe this is why there is no peace in the Middle East. There are only pigeons. And in the Bible, in the story of Noah and the flood, so he sends a pigeon, not a dove, to see if the flood is over. So we are now living in the midst of a flood of information. And this is kind of my pigeon being sent to see if the flood is over. And the other reason is that one of the chief characters of the book is a pigeon called Cherami, which was 100 years ago was basically the most famous bird in the world. And I think he is still on display in the Smithsonian, not far from here. And
tell the story of Cherami, because it's actually, I think, quite important to the arguments you make in the book.
Yeah, so how did this bird become the most famous bird in the world? So during the First World War, when the American Expeditionary Force fought in northern France against the Germans, so an American battalion was caught behind German lines, surrounded by the Germans, and American artillery, which tried to provide them with cover fire, didn't know their exact location and actually dropped the artillery barrage right on the American soldiers, adding to the problems. And they tried to send runners to division headquarters to inform the commanders where the battalion actually is, but none of them could get through the German lines, so they turned to the only thing that could, which was a carrier pigeon, Cherami. And the commander wrote this tiny note on a piece of paper and attached it to the leg of the pigeon, and they released it to the air, and the pigeon flew through the German fire. It was hit several times. It lost the other leg, luckily not the leg with the note. It was shot through the breast, but it nevertheless managed to get through. And the artillery barrage was lifted, and help was sent to the right place, and the battalion, which was known as the Lost Battalion, was saved. And the pigeon, which was called Cherami, was then hailed as the bird that saved hundreds of American soldiers from death or captivity at the hands of the Germans. At least this was the story, which was repeated again and again in army communiques, in the newspapers. There are movies, there are children's books. So if you want to read a story, there is still a children's book about Cherami, the brave pigeon. A recent historical research that delved into the archives raised a lot of question marks about this whole story. First of all, it now turns out that the headquarters learned about the right location of the battalion before the pigeon arrived. And then it turned out that nobody is sure that the pigeon was actually Cherami, that it could have been a completely different pigeon. But still, the Cherami was displayed in the Smithsonian for years and became a pilgrimage site for veterans of the First World War, and was the most famous bird in the world. And this is part of what the book is about the power of information on the one hand, and about the tension between the truth and the stories we tell, and the effectiveness of stories which are not necessarily always truthful.
And that's why it caught my attention, because, as you may have heard in America, we still have some of these issues, and in fact, often with animals. And so I'm going to read a quote that one of our modern philosophers dealing with the same issue, J.D. Vance, said yesterday. If I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do. You are in favor of that, correct?
I'm not saying I'm in favor. I'm saying that this is what is happening throughout human history.
Yeah.
That, again, most information is not the truth. The truth is a rare and costly subset of information. If you want to write a true story, you need to invest a lot of time and effort and money, whereas fiction or fantasy, they are very cheap. You just write the first thing that comes to your mind. The truth also tends to be complicated, because reality is complicated, whereas fiction, you can make it as simple as you like it to be, and people usually prefer simple stories. And the last disadvantage of the truth is that the truth is often painful, whether on the individual level, or if you talk about, say, Israeli politics, on the national level. There are many things people don't want to know about themselves, about their nation, about the world. And fiction can be made as flattering as you would like it to be. So in a competition between something which is cheap and simple and flattering, and something which is costly and complicated and sometimes painful, it's obvious who is going to win unless you give the truth some help.
This is the exact argument I made to my board yesterday while I'm trying to raise money for our fact-checking department. But let me ask you then about the question of a noble lie, because it's clear that history is determined by the people who tell the stories, which have either truth in them or they don't have truth in them. And you are not as dismissive of the idea of a noble lie as I expected you would be when I began the book. Explain in what circumstances it is okay for someone who is telling a story to not tell it exactly truthfully for the greater good of some kind.
It is impossible for a story to be an exact replica of reality. There is a famous Borges story about an empire that wants to create a totally truthful map, which will be exactly an exact representation of reality. And they end up producing a map with a scale of 1:1. Because this is the only map which will be 100% truthful and accurate and will not simplify anything, will not change anything. It will have to be a 1:1 map. And so the empire was covered by a map of the empire. And the effort of creating this empire, this map, exhausted the resources of the empire that therefore collapsed. And we are now in a similar situation to some extent. There is a crisis of representation in the world. That no representation seems good enough for us. Because no representation can actually be a one-to-one map of the world. This is simply impossible. And we are not sure what to do about it. Now, my position is that every story to some extent is fictional. Because every story, you can't tell the whole truth. This is simply impossible. And there are cases that, yes, you need to simplify. As somebody who wrote, the history of the world in 500 pages, I know that sometimes you have to simplify. And fiction in itself is not necessarily bad. The rules of football or baseball, they are fictional. We invented them. It doesn't mean that they are bad. Fictional literature is not all bad. The key is that fiction should acknowledge its fictionality and not pretend to be reality. And when you think about the cultural or political implications of that, if you want to unite a large number of people, you need to use some stories, some mythologies. And this is not necessarily bad as long as you acknowledge what you're doing. So if we compare, for instance, two foundational texts of human history, if you compare the 10 Commandments and the US Constitution, so one text acknowledges its fictionality and the other doesn't. The 10 Commandments doesn't acknowledge that it emerged from human imagination. It claims to be the product of divine intelligence, to come down from heaven. And the downside of that is that it has no mechanism to admit and correct its own mistakes. And for instance, the 10 Commandments, as they were written sometime in the first millennium BCE, they endorse slavery. Many people don't think about it or don't notice it, but the 10th commandment actually endorses slavery. It says it's okay to hold slaves because the 10th commandment says that you should not covet your neighbor's field or ox or slaves, which implies that God has no problem with people holding slaves. God has a problem only if you covet the slaves of your neighbor. No, that's not okay. That will make God angry. And compare that to the US Constitution, which also, like the 10 Commandments, have served as the basis for large-scale human cooperation, for legal systems, for political systems. Whereas the 10 Commandments start with, I am your Lord God, the US Constitution starts with, we the people. We the people invented this document. We invented these laws. And therefore, because it acknowledges that it emerges from the human imagination, it's humans who wrote this document, it also acknowledged the potential that there might be mistakes in the document, and it has a mechanism to amend itself, which was eventually used to amend the US Constitution, which again initially endorsed slavery and was eventually amended to forbid, to ban slavery. Whereas with the 10 Commandments, because they claim to be just, they came down from heaven, there is no mechanism to change the text. There is no 11th commandment which tells people, well, if you don't like something in the 10th commandment, if you have a 2/3 majority, you can change the text. No, there is no mechanism.
I would think it might be possible for Pope Francis to change the second commandment better than the U.S. Congress could change the Second Amendment, but that's where we are. All right, let's stick with religion. I want you to tell the story that I think comes up in at least 3 very consequential parts of the book is the story of the Council of Hippo in Carthage and the consequences of selecting 1 Timothy into the New Testament instead of the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Will you explain that story? I think it's a very important follow-on to what you were just saying about the power of story, and I swear to God, we'll get to AI in just a minute, but this is an important premise for that.
We can actually start with AI, which is very, very relevant to the Church Council of Carthage, which took place in what is today Tunisia in 397 CE, because AI one of the first big things that we saw it do, that shaping human history, is taking the power of recommendation. That if you go on social media, what you see there is the result of recommendations made by social media algorithms. And the power to recommend to people what stories to read or what videos to watch is extremely important. And one of the best examples in history for the power of recommendation is the editorial process that created the Bible in the New Testament. The people who created the New Testament are not the authors of the texts. They are the editors who decided what will be in and what will be out. Because, there was no New Testament, there was no Bible in the time of Jesus or in the time of St. Paul. They never read the Bible, it didn't exist. In the first 4 centuries of Christianity, Christians produced an enormous number and enormous variety of texts. There were stories about Christ, there were prophecies, doomsday prophecies about the apocalypse, there were letters by St. Paul, by other church leaders, there were lots of fake letters that people wrote things in the name of St. Paul like 200 years after the man was dead. So Christian communities were again flooded by a very large number of texts, and a question arose: what should good Christians read? They needed a recommendation list, the same way that today we are flooded by TV series and we need a recommendation list, what to watch. So in the late 4th century, a committee was set up, a church council, theologians, bishops. They met first in Hippo, in what is today, I think, Algeria, then in Carthage, in what is today Tunisia, and they hammered out a recommendation list, top 27 texts every Christian should read. And this became the New Testament. They didn't write the text. They went over, again, very large numbers of texts that existed at the time and chose what will be in and what will be out. And this shaped Christianity and the views of billions of people on numerous issues until this very day. And to give you just one example out of many, so one very popular text with Christians at the time was the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Paul is Saint Paul, and Thecla was one of the most favorite saints of the time. She was a woman disciple of Paul, and she was a leader of the community. She preached, she performed miracles, she baptized, and she was hailed as an example that women can be leaders in the church, and women can preach, and women can baptize and perform miracles. So this was one popular text with one view of women. Then there was another text, a letter, allegedly from St. Paul to Timothy, which most scholars today think is a much later forgery. It was not written by St. Paul in the 1st century, probably forged in his name sometime in the 2nd century. And in this letter, a completely different view of women and their role in the church. It says that women should be obedient, should be silent, should never be leaders. They should fulfill themselves by doing whatever men tell them to do, and by having children and raising children. This is their role in life. And the committee in Carthage decided to exclude the Acts of Paul and Thecla from the top 27, but to include this letter to Timothy, which is still part of the New Testament around the world, as 1 Timothy. And this has shaped the views of billions of Christians about women in the church and also in general for more than 1,500 years. This is the power of recommendation. And now this power, and this connects to AI, this is the power which is increasingly held by AI algorithms. We have now this kind of huge public debate about social media and the spread of fake news and conspiracy theories and so forth on social media. And you hear people like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg saying that we don't want to censor anybody, that this is an issue of freedom of speech. But it's not. The problem with the spread of this type of information on social media is not human users producing certain lies or fictions or fake news. The real problem is corporate algorithms deciding which stories to recommend, which stories to promote. And the power that was held by the bishops in the Council of Carthage and the power that was held by newspaper editors in recent generations, this is now the power in the hands of the social media algorithms. And this should be at the center of the debate, which we'll get to. On regulation, it's not about the freedom of speech of humans. It's about the responsibility of the corporate algorithms. Because if a corporate algorithm decides to promote a certain conspiracy, this is not on the person who invented it. This is the decision of the algorithm and the decision of its human corporate masters, and this is what should be at the center of the debate.
So what I'm hearing is if the Council of Carthage had been slightly different, women would have been empowered much sooner. We would have had a feminist revolution several centuries earlier. Probably AI would have been invented, and we all would be obliterated by now. Is that correct, Yuval?
That's one possibility. I mean, you can never, I mean, history is extremely surprising.
Yeah, no, I know.
So you can never predict the outcome.
You can't unspool one thread from the tapestry. Let's go to some of the concerns you have about AI. I want to go through some of the concerns very quickly, and then I want to go through your philosophy of how these algorithms should be structured. But very briefly, in just a word or two, explain why modern AI might destroy democracy.
Ooh. Very briefly. Well, very briefly, democracy is a conversation. Now, dictatorship is one person dictating everything. That's dictatorship. Democracy is when a group of people have a conversation in order to decide what to do about any major question. Now, to have a conversation is not an easy thing. And there are technical difficulties. If you have 20 people trying to have a conversation, so they can all gather in a room and talk with each other. But how can 20 million people have a conversation? You need some kind of technology in order to do that. Now, until the modern age, there was just no technology to facilitate large-scale conversations, which is why there were no large-scale democracies anywhere in the world. The only examples we have of ancient democracies, they are all small-scale. They are city-states like Athens or Republican Rome, just one city, or they are even smaller, tribes and bands and villages. We have many examples of these small-scale democracies, not a single example of a large-scale democracy in the ancient world. All large-scale polities are authoritarian. We begin to see large-scale democracies only after the rise of modern information technology. The first crucial technology is the newspaper, and then we have the telegraph, and the radio, and the television, and suddenly it becomes feasible. There are other conditions that have to be met. It doesn't guarantee democracy, just that you have a newspaper. You have newspapers and radio also in the Soviet Union. But it becomes possible for the first time in history to have large-scale democracies. And it's important to understand that because it means that information technology is not a side dish, that you have democracy, and on the side you have all these issues with information technology. No, information technology is the basis of democracy. Democracy is built on top of this technology. So any major change in information technology is likely to cause an earthquake in democracy, which is built on top of it. And this is what we are now seeing all over the world. What we are seeing all over the world is the collapse of the democratic conversation. We have the most sophisticated information technology in human history, and people are losing the ability to talk with each other, and even more so, to listen to each other. And in every country where this is happening, there are these unique explanations of what is happening in our country. Why can't Democrats and Republicans in the US have a conversation anymore? And you go to Israel, to my country, you hear the unique explanation of what is wrong with Israel. And then you go to Brazil, and then you have the unique explanations of what's wrong with Brazilian society. But you see, the same thing is happening everywhere. The conversation is collapsing, and this is not because of some special feature in the history or society or economy of the country. It's a universal earthquake which results from the rise of this new information technology that originally the developers of the technology promised to us that it will spread the truth and bring tyrannies down and strengthen democracies, but it is doing the opposite. And very briefly, one way to visualize what is happening is imagine that democracy is a group of humans standing and having a conversation, and suddenly a group of robots enter the circle and start talking very loudly, very persuasively, very emotionally, and we can't tell who is a human and who is a robot. This is what has been happening over the last 10, 15 years, and the result is that the conversation is breaking down. And again, this is not a uniquely American phenomenon. It is happening all over the world, leading more and more to the rise of dictatorships, because dictatorships don't need conversations. Again, there is one person dictating everything.
Well, but let's push on that assumption for a second. So I could have a different metaphor, which is not a bunch of robots enter the conversation, but a bunch of infinitely intelligent aides join me, and they help me sort through the conversation, and they help me prepare for what I'm going to ask. And then not only that, if you look at the last year, obviously Venezuela, tragic example, but we had, elections are not the same as democracy, but we'll use them as a proxy for this hypothetical. We had reasonably positive elections, if you're in favor of democracy, in Poland. We had a little bit of progress in Turkey, serious progress in India, in fact, where an illiberal democracy has actually been challenged. We had an extremely smooth election leading to the election of a Jewish woman in Mexico. We had extremely swift and effective, no deepfakes, maybe don't like the outcome of the election in France. Similar election in the United Kingdom. I mean, the world's doing all right on these elections despite the challenges of social media, AI, everything else.
And it's not that it's already a done deal. It's not that democracy has collapsed. But if you look at the health of democracies today compared to 10 years ago or 15 years ago, at least the momentum is very worrying. And again, it's not, I don't think, what really surprises me when I look at the examples from around the world is that it's not about some huge ideological gaps. Actually, the ideological gaps between the different camps today in a place like the US are much smaller than 50 years ago. What worries is the kind of temperature of the argument, and again, this inability to have a reasoned debate, to have a reasoned conversation. Simply having elections is important, but it is not enough. Elections are not democracy. And even in some of the examples you mentioned, so it's not about who wins, which 51% win in the end. It's about the relation between the 51% and the 49%. And democracy shouldn't feel like every election is a life and death struggle, that if we lose this, it might collapse. And even more so, it shouldn't feel like a war between enemies. If a country reaches a situation when people view their political rivals as enemies, then democracy cannot survive for long, because then every election, again, it's like a war. You do anything to win. If you lose, you have no incentive to accept the verdict. if you win, you only take care of your tribe. What is happening in this situation, that a nation breaks down into tribes, leading eventually either to tribal warfare and civil war or to dictatorship. I think that the key thing here also has to do not just with democracy, but also with nationalism and with the breakdown of national communities. That many people think that democracy and nationalism, or democracy and patriotism, are somehow opposites, but they go together, they must go together. Democracy functions well only when there is a national community, only when you feel that you really care about the other people in your country and that they really care about you. If a nation reaches a point when there is no longer a nation, there are warring tribes, and each tribe cares only about itself, then it's only a question of time before democracy collapses. And this is really the worrying trend that we see in many places around the world, irrespective of the results of the latest elections here or there. And this, again, it goes back to the type of communication between people. Can we, for instance, listen to people with different views from our own without thinking that they are enemies?
I learned in the green room that one of the ways that Yuval avoids arguing with bots on Twitter is that he, as he says, is he's stuck in the 90s and uses email and the telephone. Let me ask you a question then. All right, so we're heading into this age. I will certainly agree that democracy is at risk, and I will certainly agree it is at risk for the reasons you give, and I will certainly agree that we will soon have extremely powerful AI algorithms that will underlie a lot of the decisions we make and a lot of the thinking that goes on in our own heads. In a very important section in the book, you lay out 4 values that you think should be embedded in AI systems, and they are benevolence, right? AI systems should be benevolent, seems reasonable. Decentralized, mutuality, you should understand about it, what it understands about you, and the ability to evolve, much as you said about the US Constitution versus the 10 Commandments. So a question for you, what happens when some of these come into conflict with each other, right? So when I read that section, I thought, well, benevolence kind of is in tension with decentralization, because if you decentralize these algorithms, then suddenly you have all kinds of algorithms, you have all kinds of options, you have all kinds of different companies, some of which will be benevolent as you define it, some will not be benevolent as you define it. Well, how is one supposed to weigh these 4 principles for designing future AI systems? Because weighing them correctly seems pretty important to getting the world you want.
Yeah, with benevolence, I mean something very, very narrow, and something we've known for centuries. Simply that if you get hold of my information, you should use it for my benefit and not in order to manipulate me, which is a basic principle that we already have with our doctors and our lawyers and our accountants and our therapists, and it should be no different with the people who provide us with digital services like social media or like email. Like my personal physician...
But pause for a second. Facebook would not have said it's manipulating us, even when in the sort of the heyday of its algorithm. It would have said it's giving us what we want.
That's one way of putting it. And the Facebook algorithm has enormous power over us. And Facebook's business model, and the business model of most of these social media companies, it is based on increasing user engagement. And engagement sounds like a nice thing, but who doesn't want to be engaged? But for them, for the companies, it means that we need to spend more time on the platform, because the more time I spend on it, the more money they make, either by showing me advertisements and commercials or by collecting my data and then giving it or selling it to third parties. And whether this is what I want or not, that's a very big question. Do I really want to spend more and more time on the platform? Now, what their algorithms do is, by trial and error, they find my weaknesses. And they use my weaknesses to keep me glued to the screen for longer. This is the basic idea of hacking. How do you hack a smartphone or a computer or a program? You look for the weaknesses in the code. It's the same with human beings. This is how you hack human beings. You use these algorithms to find the weaknesses in our code. Each person with their own weaknesses. It's not one size fits all. What makes me angry? What do I already hate? What do I already fear? Or what I'm greedy for? And they give me more and more and more of that. It's like, the food companies that learn that if you pump something full of sugar and fat and salt, people would want more of it. Now, is it really good for us or not? Again, there is a question here. It's not an easy thing to solve, but this is the key of the dilemma, the key of the discussion. And again, the main message is that ultimately it should not be about the profits of the corporation, but whether consuming all this information is really good for me or not. And one last point, I think like in the example of food, we've reached a point when I think most people need an information diet. That this simplistic idea that more information is always good for us is simply wrong, the same way that more food is not always good for us.
Well, that's why everybody should subscribe to The Atlantic. Let me give you a thought experiment. Because part of what I think is going to, for your system to come down and to work, it's going to depend a little bit on who defines benevolence and who defines these values. And so I want to give you a thought experiment from a conversation I had at a bar not long ago. So I met somebody. I'm going to change some of the details because I can't reveal who they are and what exactly they do. But it was an engineer who works in AI, and they make algorithms. And their current job is that they work for the state of Texas, and they're in charge of the sentencing algorithm. And so they're in charge of an AI algorithm that will determine how long somebody who's guilty will be sent to prison. And so they have hard tasks, right? They have to make sure any algorithm that is trained on historical data will have the biases of that historical data. So you train a sentencing algorithm on historic Texas data, it will be racist, so you have to control for that. You may let the women out sooner, you have to make sure that's proper and right. And you go back through and you control through it and you try to fix that. And so we're having a long conversation and I'm asking her, well, how do you control for this and how do you control for that and how do you control for this? And eventually she says, you know what I do, Nick? She said, I've rigged the algorithm. And I've rigged it in such a way that everybody will be sentenced for much less time than the state of Texas did before. And I've done it in such a way the state of Texas will never figure out that I've done that. Is that something that an AI engineer should be doing?
That's extremely dangerous. Because
extremely dangerous, but it may be a value that many liberals agree with, and they feel like conservative states have sentenced people for too long. So it's embedding a value that that person feels is benevolent into a system and leading to what they believe is justice.
At the very least, when we are talking about, the law of a country, this should be left to the citizens and to the voters,
well, it has
and
been.
not to the, a dictatorship of an engineer.
Well, they've given the power to hire whatever contractor they want to the state. They've elected, the governor of the state of Texas, and they've hired this person. The state is not Texas where this is happening, so don't Google sentencing algorithm. It's a different thing in a different place. You won't be able to figure it out, but it's the same example.
I think that the key point that is raised by this example is the issue of unfathomability. To what extent we can still understand the systems that control our lives.
Yeah.
When I get this question a lot of what really frightens me about AI. And you have these kind of Hollywood science fiction scenarios of the big robot rebellion, and the robots are rebelling and coming to kill us, and this is unlikely to happen anytime soon. But what is already happening, this is not a science fiction scenario for the future. What is already happening is that we basically have millions of AI bureaucrats, millions of bureaucratic algorithms making more and more decisions about our life. We apply to a bank to get a loan, it's an AI deciding. We committed a crime, they send us to prison, it's increasingly an AI deciding. For how long? And this could rise to the level of key economic and financial decisions. about what would be the rate of interest of the Federal Reserve. This could increasingly be a decision made by AIs and not human beings. And there are many good reasons why to give this kind of power to AIs. But what happened down the road when eventually so many of these crucial decisions about us are made in a way that we simply cannot understand? We don't know why the bank refused us a loan. We don't know why they sent us to 5 years and not 4 years or 6 years in prison. We don't know why the interest rate is 4% and not 3%. And we don't know, not because somebody's hiding it from us, simply because it's far too complicated for the human brain. That the advantage of AI, the good side of AI, that it can analyze much more data than any human brain, find patterns that we can't, deal with mathematical complexities which are way beyond what we can deal with. But the downside of all that is, what is the meaning, for instance, of democracy? If increasingly all the decisions, or at least many of the decisions, are made in a way which are not transparent and therefore not accountable to human beings.
Let's go through another one, which is somewhat similar. So one of the companies that makes AI systems is Anthropic. And they use this system called constitutional AI as they choose how they write their prompts and how they structure their algorithm, which is probably the closest of the major AI companies to, as I understand it, the philosophy of Yuval Harari. And so when it gives an answer, it checks whether the answer would abide by the UN Declaration of Human Rights, right? It actually follows like the US Constitution, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and Apple's Terms of Service. It's very funny. But in any event, the biggest problem that they have and the other AI companies is they don't know. Just as you said, they don't know why things make decisions. And so they've been trying to understand what's called interpretability. And so they went in and they said, well, let's see what happens if we go into all of our training data and we add a little extra weight to everything that has to do with the Golden Gate Bridge. So if there's a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge, we'll weigh it double. If there's a mention of the Golden Gate Bridge, we'll weigh it double. If there's a word, if there's a box score about the San Francisco Giants, we'll weigh that a little more than one about the Philadelphia Phillies. They do all that, and then they ask Claude, tell me a love story. And naturally, the love story takes place on the Golden Gate Bridge, right? If you mess with the training data and the weights, you get some of these interesting outcomes. So then the question for you would be, if we can do this, why not go into the AI and not weight it towards the Golden Gate Bridge, but weight it towards love, compassion, benevolence? Is that a good idea?
I'm not sure what it means in a technical sense, but when I look at human history, I know that quite often in history, people talk about love, or they start with love, and very quickly they get to hate and to war. The Christianity, which sees itself, and going back to the Council of Carthage, sees itself as the religion of love, that it's all about love, was responsible for more violence than any other religion or ideology in history. And they somehow found a way how, out of love, we wage crusades, and we build inquisitions, and we burn heretics at the stake. It's all out of love. And they really believed it.
They also gave us Bach.
But again, the way that I think this often happens is that if you think that you are motivated by love, and if you think that you're trying to build utopia, whoever stands in your way must be demonic. Whoever stands in your way must be evil. The more good I am, then any opposition is, by definition, it's not just somebody who thinks differently, but they are evil. Now, again, I'm not sure how to translate that into AI speak, but again, one of the lessons from history is that just thinking that because we have these kind of good weights, we've weighted our holy book, we've weighted the code in favor of love. Anything that has love, it got extra. Anything that has compassion, it got extra. And somehow from that, you get the Inquisition. So if it happens with humans, I would also be very worried about AI. But what we need, the basic thing that, again, we learn again and again in history is that we need a self-correcting mechanism. We can't trust that just because something has these good values at its basis, what will come out of it will also necessarily be benevolent and compassionate. We saw it again in the modern age with Marxism, which begins with, these wonderful ideas of equality and of compassion, and ends with the gulags. And if you're really convinced that you're coming from a good foundation, and also if you think that you're in the process of building utopia, then it gives you an open check to do the most horrible things on the way to utopia. And again, anything that stands in your way is then transformed from political rivalry to kind of demonic possession.
I mean, in some ways, this is one of the scariest things you said, because the people who are building the AI models genuinely do believe they're leading us to utopia, right?
And that's very, very dangerous, because this is what gives them the open check. They say, we're building utopia, so anything that kind of we have to sacrifice on the way is worth it, because when you would look at the bottom line, and this was the basic argument also of people like Lenin and Stalin. Yes, we have to murder these millions of people, but in the end, when we build utopia, real existing socialism here on Earth, it will turn out that it's, these billions who died in the Gulag, this was worth it.
Man, I had never thought of the Khmer Rouge at the same time I thought of Anthropic, but here we are. But hold on, Yuval. In the next couple weeks, I think, where were you last? You were last in Toronto. You're probably going to move west, and you're probably going to sit down, and you're going to sit down with all these people because they all read your books, right? There's this famous image of Jeff Bezos, and he's giving this interview, and he's got like 4 books behind him on his bookshelf, and like plants, and and 3 of them are Yuval's, I believe. So you're going to be talking to these folks, and so what you're telling me is that if, say, Dario Modi, the guy who runs Anthropic, is there, he's like, we're trying to figure out what to train on, and I've been thinking we should train it on. We should just train it on sort of positive, uplifting, factual stories. I really don't think we should, train it on everything, which includes like serial killers' diaries. And you're going to say like, no, put the serial killers' diaries in there because, don't just train it on your definition of love. Is that what you're going to argue to him?
No, I mean, I would basically say that I don't know how to train AIs. This is not my field. But no matter what kind of positive basis you give it, and no matter what positive intentions you have, your number one assumption should be that this thing is not infallible. I'm not infallible. There is a high chance for mistakes, and therefore I need to leave room for correction. The most important thing when you build it is build a mechanism for identifying and correcting the mistakes. Again, this is also the advice that I would have gave Lenin in 1917. Like, you're going on this huge experiment, you're thinking that you're building utopia, start with the assumption that you will make mistakes, include in the structure, say, of the Soviet Union, mechanisms for identifying and correcting the mistakes of the system, including the mistakes of Lenin and of whoever is going to succeed you, which is the one thing they didn't do.
Yeah, Lenin should have read *Sapiens*. I have an image of him reading it on the train there. All right, let's talk a little bit about cocoons, which is one of the extremely interesting parts of your book. So you make an argument, and you say that there are some fundamental human issues, like the separation of mind and body. You tell the story of Martin Luther. It's actually a way of telling the story of Martin Luther I had not read before. But you argue that what could happen in an age of AI is that you end up with some civilizations that have a totally different understanding of what is the mind and what is the body, and therefore totally different judicial systems. So it's one of the most mind-bending parts of the book. I'd like you to explain this to the audience.
Ooh. So there is a lot of explaining. I'll try to do it short. I mean, first of all, about the cocoons, it's the changing of the metaphors in this age of information revolution. That 30 years ago, the dominant metaphor was the web, the World Wide Web, and the web was supposed to connect everything and everybody. And over the years, the web kind of closed in on us, and now it's the cocoons, that every person or every group is enclosed within an information cocoon. And sometimes, you know, your next door neighbors are in a different cocoon than you, and there is just no way to access from one to the other. And an extreme example of where this can go, like today, people don't agree, like in the United States, about who won the last elections. This can go to a place where people don't agree what a human is, or what a person is, and what are the relations between mind and body. One of the recurrent arguments throughout history that we see in many traditions, in Judaism, in Christianity, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, is what exactly is a human being, and what is the relation between mind and body, or between soul and spirit and body. So if we again go back to the age of the Council of Carthage and early Christianity, so Judaism and the first Christians, which came out of Judaism, they viewed humans as embodied entities. The body was central. We are bodies. The soul, biblical Judaism did not talk at all about the soul. The idea that there could be a soul that exists separately from the body, unheard of in biblical Judaism. It's all about the body. And also the first Christians, they focus on the body. The whole idea originally is that God is incarnated in the flesh. The flesh is at the center. And after Jesus is crucified, he's supposed to come back in the flesh. And the kingdom of God is supposed to be a material kingdom of fleshy bodies on the earth. But eventually, under influences of Platonic philosophies and other influences, and also for practical purposes, because the kingdom of God was nowhere to be seen, and the really big problem for early Christians is that they won. You know, when you're a persecuted minority, a sect, you can have all these promises, okay, when we finally gain power, then we'll have the kingdom of God. And then they have one of the biggest disasters that can happen to any religion, they gain power. They become the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, so where's the kingdom of God? And there is no kingdom of God. You still have the same wars and corruptions and civil wars and executions and human greed, and it's all the same. So they say, okay, the kingdom of God is not on earth. It's on a different level of reality. It's in heaven. And you can't access it in the flesh. After you die, your soul will get to heaven. And many Christians drift towards a very different view of humans, as a dualistic view actually, that my real essence is my soul, which is entrapped in a material, biological, filthy body with all these sexual passions and all these lusts. And the hope, the ideal, is that eventually the soul will be released from this earthly, fleshy prison and get to a purely immaterial realm, which is heaven, where it will exist forever and ever. And throughout the 2,000 years of Christian history, you see this tension. They can never really abandon the body, partly because the Bible is full of it. And again, Christ was incarnated in the body, in the flesh, and rose and came back to life in the flesh. And there is very little about this immaterial realm of pure souls in the Bible itself. It all mostly came later. So there is this constant arguments that often leads to blows and to wars of religion. And in the early century of the church, one of the biggest arguments was about the nature of Jesus Christ himself, with one camp saying that he was entirely a human, made of flesh, another camp saying that he was entirely divine and non-material, a spiritual being. And there was a third camp who said that he was non-binary. And the non-binaries won. This was the eventually official doctrine of the church. He is non-binary. He's both and none at the same time. But huge arguments and also violence around these issues. Now, how does all this relate to AI? We are going to have another round of this mind-body debate. We are already in the midst of it. What is your identity? What defines your identity? Is your identity defined by your biological body? Or is your identity defined by what you believe about yourself, by your faith? You know, people like Martin Luther, they said sola fide. The only thing that matters is what you believe. And we are now living in a kind of new round of this debate, with some people say if you go online, you can be whatever you want. The biological body sitting in front of the screen should not limit the identities that you can adopt. Other people say, no, 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 there is a biological body. This is the center of your identity. You cannot ignore your biological body. And as everybody knows, this is a very heated debate right now. And this also potentially will influence how we treat AIs. AIs have no bodies, but they will increasingly be able to interact with us and to press our emotional buttons and even to pretend to have emotions of themselves. Now, people who give primacy to the body in the identity of a person will resist treating AIs as persons. People who think that identity has little to do with biology will have a much easier time giving or treating AIs as persons, even though they have no bodies. And different countries can go different ways. So, you know, arguments about human rights today between, say, United States and China, think what it means in 50 years when you perhaps have billions of entities which are considered persons with rights in one country, but another country doesn't recognize them as persons at all because they have no biological body. And at least in the US, interestingly enough, there is already a completely open legal path to recognizing non-humans devoid of bodies as legal persons with rights. Because corporations, according to US law, are legal persons that has, for instance, freedom of speech, according to the Supreme Court since at least 2010. Now, at present, this is a legal fiction, because all the decisions of corporations are made by human beings with biological bodies. So Google, according to US law, is a legal person, but at present, all the decisions of Google have to be made by some human being. But what happens, in a few years maybe, when you start incorporating AIs as legal persons? You can technically incorporate an AI as a corporation, let's call it Google. And the interesting thing about Google is that it doesn't need any human employees to make its decisions for it. This is what the AI can do it by itself. So the AI, for instance, can open a bank account and can start earning money. It can go on TaskRabbit or Mechanical Turk online and offer its services to people or corporations and earn money, and then it has money. And then it can start investing its money in the stock exchange. And if it's a very intelligent AI, it could potentially become the richest person in the US. So think about a situation when the richest person in the US is not a human being. It's an AI. And again, according to US law, as far as I understand, one of the rights reserved for this non-human person is freedom of speech, which manifests itself, among other things, in making political contributions. So this AI could donate billions of dollars to politicians in exchange for giving even more rights to AI. So these are the kinds of science fiction scenarios I think that we should be more concerned with than the Great Robot Rebellion.
If a senior AI bot starts to hit on a junior AI bot in this corporation, what should the AI HR department... Okay. We have a bunch of flesh and blood bodies here who have to go get pizza and beer. So I'm going to ask just one more question about the apocalypse, and then we're going to go to audience questions. So I was reading your book on the subway. I was wrapping it up before dinner the other night with my son, and this was my favorite paragraph. I'm just going to read it to you, and I want you to explain what it means. We have now created a non-conscious, but very powerful alien intelligence. Agreed. If we mishandle it, AI might extinguish not only the human dominion on Earth, but the light of consciousness itself, turning the universe into a realm of utter darkness. Very cheerful book here, Yuval. This is the end. It is our responsibility to prevent this. So one way to prevent it would be to prevent AI from extinguishing us. Another would be to try to create consciousness and send it out into the universe. Explain to me, the question that this paragraph raises is, what is the thing that humans could do that would allow consciousness to exist even if we extinguish ourselves?
Oh, I'm not sure what it is. I mean, the problem is we still don't understand consciousness. We don't know how it emerges in us. We don't know how it evolved. That's why we also, with regard to AI, this big question of AI consciousness, I tend to be agnostic about it. I don't think that AIs will necessarily develop consciousness, but I'm not sure that they will never develop consciousness. That could be. So again, this scenario that AIs destroy human civilization, take over, and maybe spread from Earth to the rest of the galaxy and to other galaxies, but in the process they never develop consciousness. This is the dark universe scenario. That, again, that there is a huge confusion about these two terms because in humans they go together. Intelligence is the ability to attain goals and solve problems on the way to that goal. Consciousness is the ability to feel things like pain and pleasure and love and hate. Humans solve problems relying on our feelings. In us and in other mammals and animals, consciousness and intelligence go together. This is why we confuse them. Now, in computers, so far, we've only seen an advance, a huge advance in intelligence, without any advance in consciousness as far as we can tell. In some fields, narrow fields, AI is already far more intelligent than us, and still it has no consciousness. When it wins a game of chess, it's not happy. When it loses, it's not sad. It doesn't feel anything. Now, in many scenarios, as AI becomes more and more intelligent, at some point, it also gains consciousness. But there is no reason to think that this is inevitable. There could be different roads leading to superintelligence. Mammals and humans have been traveling along one road for millions and millions of years, a road which involves the development of consciousness. Computers, AIs, might simply be traveling along a different road, a much faster road, which reaches superintelligence without passing through any phase of developing consciousness. And if this happens, and if it gets out of our control, this could spell, again, not just the end of the human dominion on Earth, but the end of the light of consciousness itself. You can have a galactic empire without any feeling, and nothing feels anything. It's just all dark.
But why is that? Explain to me why that is so much a worse outcome than just the obliteration of humans, which is a plenty bad outcome. There
are other entities, conscious entities in the world right now. There are other animals. There is no reason to think that, in the history of billions of years of life, that sapiens is definitely the last station. Whether through biological evolution or whether through some kind of combination with AI, it's very likely that if we survive, I don't think that humans like us will still be here in 1,000 years or 10,000 years. The technology will be so advanced that there will be sentient beings, but they will have completely different bodies and minds, completely different experiences. And this is not necessarily bad. The same way that, the fact that we are here and the first human species that existed 2 million years ago are gone, we don't think about it as a tragedy. And most people, at least with regard to their children, they hope that their children will be, at least in some way, a bit more evolved than them. But to think that this will be completely wiped out, that there will still be intelligence, but no consciousness at all. I mean, I think that intelligence is really overrated. The really important thing in life is consciousness. It's not intelligence. I mean, intelligence enables us to do different things, but ultimately, it's all about consciousness.
You know who's still going to be there, Yuval? These guys.
The
Pigeons are going to be there, and they're going to speak thousands of languages. All right, let's go to some audience questions. In your last book, this is from Martin Gallardo, in Homo Deus, you began your book by arguing that humanity has, quote, has almost defeated, quote, hunger, plagues, and war. Do you still stand for that idea, or have you reconsidered your argument?
I think humanity has the capacity to rein in famine, plague, and war, but it depends whether we actually do it, depends on our decisions, and we have been making some terrible decisions over the last 10 years, which is why we are seeing the return of these calamities, of these conditions. We are now on the verge of a third world war, which, if it happens, is also likely to be accompanied by famine and potentially by plague. And the key thing to understand is that the decline, for instance, of war in recent generations was not the result of a change in the laws of nature. It was not some divine miracle. It was simply humans making good decisions and building good institutions. And if we start making bad decisions and neglecting the institutions that preserved peace, then war returns.
This question is from Hamad Alavi. There is growing concern regarding the impact of AI on employment, particularly for low-skilled jobs and low-income communities. Considering the rapid advancements and uncertainties associated with AI, what strategies or measures can be implemented to alleviate these negative effects?
The safest thing is to slow down. I think that humans and human societies are extremely adaptable, but in order to adapt, you need time. So, if 10% or 20% of people suddenly lose their jobs, this is a huge political crisis. If it's kind of more drawn out over several years, we have time to adapt. And the most important thing is what happens on the global level. Because when I look at the country like the United States, for instance, I'm not so worried. I mean, many jobs will disappear in the coming decade or two. Other jobs will emerge. The big question is whether people will be able to retrain themselves to fill the new jobs. And for that, they will need support. And the countries that lead the AI revolution, they will have immense resources to support the retraining of the population and also to support those members of society that will not be able to go through the transition. The big problem will be in other countries that might face complete economic collapse and will just not have the resources to retrain their workforce and to adapt to the new AI economy.
What do you think of the premise of the question that AI will affect employment, particularly for low-skilled jobs in low-income communities? People argue both sides of that.
I'm not sure. There are good reasons to think it will definitely impact also kind of high-income jobs, accountants, lawyers, doctors, coders, engineers. There is no reason to think that it will focus specifically on low-income jobs.
I think it's probably going to wipe out media CEOs and historians first. This is from Mike Sexton. My favorite thing about your historical writing is that it has implications not just for how we live, but how we should live. If you were a lifestyle guru instead, what message or recommendations would you have for your audience?
I'm not a lifestyle guru, so I don't know.
As most of you know, this man meditates 2 hours a day, takes a month-long retreat. You are a lifestyle guru.
Yeah, but I don't tell all people to do it. I know that, it works for me, but I know it doesn't work for other people. If for somebody else, it's better to, take a hike in the woods, so do that instead. The idea that, meditation works for me, so it must work for all people, it's not.
Yeah, I tried a month-long silent retreat and didn't work for my employees and my 3 kids. How do you think AI and disinformation will impact minority rights, especially for those in the LGBTQ+ community?
Ooh. Again, it depends on our decisions. It's not deterministic. It can work both ways. For my own life, I know that the internet and social media has been wonderful in many ways to the LGBTQ community. I met my husband 22 years ago in one of the first social media websites for gay people in Israel, which was, again, it was really a revolution. Because if you think about minorities in history, there are 2 types of minorities. You have concentrated minorities and you have dispersed minorities. And concentrated minorities, you think like Jewish communities. So if you're born a Jew, let's say in Europe in the Middle Ages, then there aren't many Jews around, but you're surrounded by them. You're born into a Jewish family, in a Jewish neighborhood, in a Jewish ghetto, in a Jewish community, you know lots of Jews. So you have no problem finding other Jews. But for instance, I was born in Israel in the 1970s. I grew up in the 80s and 90s in a very homophobic society. And I wasn't born in Tel Aviv. I was born in a small suburb of Haifa. And I didn't know anybody who was gay. And this is a dispersed minority. Most gay boys are not born to a gay family in a gay community. Sometimes it happens, but it's very rare. So the first question you encounter is, how do I find the others? Again, a question that Jews don't have to deal with, but gay people had to deal with throughout history. And then the internet came along, and to a large extent solved the problem. That suddenly it became very easy, or at least much easier than before, to find each other. So, I often criticize, and in the book there is a lot of criticism of information technology and social media, but they also have enormous positive potential.
Could extinguish the light of the universe, but good for the gays. All right. Thank you. If you could resurrect one other species of human that is now extinct, which one would you bring back and for what purpose?
I think it will be very bad for them. I mean, the way that our species treat ourselves, just because we have a little bit of different language or skin color, I wouldn't like to be a Neanderthal minority or Denisova minority in a sapiens world.
Should AI be raised with human parents along a curated, this is from Kathleen Landers, along a curated developmental trajectory to create a sense of love and attachment and connection on the assumption that it's possible to instill a moral code in the way one is created by humans, we should try?
AIs are not organic. I mean, they function along a completely different, in completely different ways. They are not, I don't know, chimpanzees or Neanderthals that you can think, okay, I'll raise a chimpanzee in a human family so it will become human-like. And this is a key kind of misconception we often have about AI. Like you have all these people asking, when will AI reach human-level intelligence? The answer is never. It's not on the path to human-level intelligence. It's not human, it's not even organic. I mean, for me, I mean, the acronym AI traditionally stood for artificial intelligence. I think it should stand for alien intelligence. Alien not in the sense of coming from outer space, alien in the sense that, yes, this is intelligence, but it makes decisions, it processes information, it invents idea in a fundamentally alien way. Again, it's not organic. One thing, just one very important thing is that organic beings, we work by cycles. Day and night, winter and summer, growth and decay, and sometimes we're active, sometimes we need to rest. One of the problems we encounter more and more in the world is that now the world is increasingly run by these non-organic intelligences that never need to rest, and they don't have cycles. And they pressure us to be the same. Instead of them becoming like us, they pressure us to be the same. And if you force an organic being to be on all the time, to be active all the time, eventually it just collapses and dies. You know, you think even about something like the financial system. So traditionally, the financial system is an organic system which sometimes take breaks. Wall Street the market is open only, I think, Monday to Friday, 9:30 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that's it. Weekend, it's off. Christmas, it's off. And this is good for human beings. But if you give AIs greater control of finance, then the system is always on, and this puts pressure on human financiers and bankers to be always on, which is just humanly impossible. And the same thing is happening to journalists, and the same thing is happening to politicians, which consequently collapse. And I often say that the most misunderstood word in the English language, at least in the United States, is the word excited. That people overuse it as a good thing. Like they meet you and they say, oh, I'm so excited to meet you. You publish a book, oh, it is so exciting. And they think that excited means happy, but it doesn't. Excited means that like your nervous system and your brain is fully on. And if you could keep the nervous system of an organic entity on all the time, it leads to collapse. So the whole system is far too excited. We need to relax. Like we meet each other, I'm so relaxed to be here with you today. And not excited at all. And just think how good it would be if politics was less exciting. Like, what we need, I think above all in politics, is boring politicians. Like, I would say, vote for boring politicians.
All right, well, I am so relaxed to ask the very last question of the night, Yuval. This is from Misha. Do you think that future reliance on artificial intelligence will impact and compete with religion as a source of spirituality?
Could be, quite likely. I think that, you know, many religions have always fantasized about having access to a superhuman intelligence. And suddenly we have it. Think about texts, about holy texts. The idea of the holy text is that this is coming from a non-human intelligence which is superior to us. Now, the problem with holy texts throughout human history until today was that they couldn't really talk back to us. Like, there was something in the text we couldn't understand, and the text could not explain itself. Like, what is the correct interpretation of this passage in Scripture? So you always, even though in theory, the highest authority in the religion was the holy text, in practice, a human institution grew around the holy text. And the real authority was in the hands of the people who interpreted the text. And the same way that you have today this fight in the tech world between people who believe in open source and people who believe that no, it should be closed and just a couple of experts will. This was the same with Catholics and Protestants. Like the Catholics say, no, you have the experts of the church, they should interpret the Holy Code. And you have the Protestants who believe in open source. Anybody can read the code and interpret it by themselves. But what happens when for the first time in history the text can talk back? Whether the text of the traditional holy books, you can train an AI to read every single treatise written by every theologian or bishop or thinker in the 3rd century or in 11th century Byzantium, and that AI will understand the texts of Christianity better than any human being? Would it be more authoritative than human theologians and bishops? One big question. The other question, what happens if you have new religions with texts written by a non-human intelligence? And this can already happening right now. With AIs maybe disseminating a new holy text online, which creates the kernel for the next big religion, which will have, again, a text that can talk back, coming from a superhuman, non-human intelligence. So I definitely think that some of the most interesting developments in AI will be in the field of theology and religion. And maybe it's and with a recommendation that Google and Microsoft, they should hire a few theologians because they will need it.
All right, that is the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much to Politics and Prose. Thank you so much to the theater. And thank you most of all to Yuval Noah Harari.
The key issue is that democracy is based on trust, whereas dictatorship is based on terror. If you systematically destroy trust in institutions, destroy trust in the media, in academia, in the courts, and so forth, some people think that this is liberating the people so that from these institutions.
Right.
It's not. When you destroy all trust, the only thing that can still work is a dictatorship. Right. So this is what would-be dictators do. They systematically destroy trust. And the other thing to realize is that the vast majority of information is not truth. A key misconception, especially in places like Silicon Valley, is to equate information with truth. Most information is junk. Because, to write a truthful story, you need to invest a lot of time and effort and money in research and fact-checking, whereas fiction is very, very cheap.
So great to meet you. I was fangirling backstage because I'm such a huge fan. I was telling Yuval that I was one of your publicists for Sapiens. I bought several copies of that book. I would give them out to people and just that sort of thing. They're always so exciting. You're so granular in the way you talk about things that we kind of take for granted. In this new book, Nexus, A Brief History of Information Networks from the Stone Age to AI. It's real fascinating talking about information. I wanted to start with this. I know this is a tough question, and you even admit in the book that it's tough. What exactly is information? How do we define that?
So many people think erroneously that information is truth, or information is the raw material of truth. You get lots of information, you analyze it, you get truth. And it isn't. Most of information is junk. Most of information is not the truth. What really defines information is connection. This is why the book is called Nexus, connection.
Right.
Because what information really does is to connect a lot of individuals, a lot of separate humans, entities, into a network. It's a glue. And you can connect, sometimes you can connect things together with the truth, but in many, many occasions, you can use fiction and fantasy and lie and illusions to also connect lots of people together into a state, an army, a corporation, a religion, whatever. To give just one example, if you think, for instance, about visual information, about portraits, about images, paintings. So if you think, what is the most famous portrait, the most common portrait in the world? What is the most famous face in history? It's the face of Jesus. You have billions and billions of images, portraits of Jesus created over the last 2,000 years. They are like everywhere on the planet, in churches, cathedrals, private homes, schools, government offices, and not a single one of them is true.
Right.
All of them, 100%.
The Swedish Jesus, right?
The Swedish Jesus,
Right.
exactly.
We all know Jesus was black.
He came from Scandinavia. And the thing is that, we just have
there is no portrait from his lifetime. If anybody even bothered, you know, he's a small provincial teacher helping people, curing the sick in a small province of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, raising people from the dead,
Raising
stuff like
the usual stuff.
Yeah, watering the wine. I like all the magic tricks, actually. Yeah.
And we don't know if anybody even bothered to draw a portrait of him. If they did, nothing survived. In the Bible, there is not a single word about how the man actually looked like. There is one sentence describing what he wore, his clothes, but nothing about whether he was tall or short, fat or thin, black hair, blonde hair, bald, nothing.
Right.
Everything we have is just coming out of the imagination of artists that lived centuries and sometimes thousands of years after him. Like one of the most famous images of Jesus, like the Scandinavian Jesus, it was made by an American artist in 1940 to give to soldiers and so forth in the Second World War. And it became, according to some statistics, I'm not sure about it exactly, according to some statistics, the most kind of successful painting of the 20th century in terms of how many copies there are.
So Jesus is basically Bing Crosby, basically. I mean, that's pretty much the image.
Yeah, it's the image. I mean, if you compare the real man to the story about the man, to the image about the man, which is mostly fiction created long after he was dead, I mean, the image is far more powerful. And it's not necessarily bad, of course. You can use it to give hope to people. You can use it to encourage people to be charitable, to help one another. So I'm not saying that fiction is necessarily bad.
Right.
I mean, we are in Los Angeles, you know, the capital city of fiction, in the world.
Exactly.
So we shouldn't trash fiction. But, you know, also...
Oh, we can trash it here.
But also I just came from New York, which is another capital city of fiction in the world. Because money is also fiction.
Yeah.
You know, the biggest storytellers in the world, in the end, they are not in LA, they're not in Hollywood, they're in Wall Street. They tell the really powerful fictions.
Yeah.
And it works. I mean, again, there are some negative aspects, positive aspects, but what you can't argue is about how successful it is in connecting people. You think about the USA today, maybe what is the last thing that everybody in the United States still agree on is the dollar.
Right.
Like Republicans and Democrats can't agree about anything, basically, like who won the last elections. They still agree on the value of a dollar.
Yeah.
And even though it's just a fiction, I mean, the dollars, they have no objective value.
Yeah, if you're on a desert island, a coconut's more valuable than a dollar.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's fast. Now, so information is valuable because it connects people, right? But it's not just, it exists as an objective truth, right? So like animals, can animals get information, or what do they get, you know, when they absorb an objective truth? That's not information, that's something...
Animals also, of course, communicate, and they pass information one to the other. But the ability, I mean, there are several types of information in the world. So you have objective truth, facts about the world, which, you know, if an asteroid comes from outer space to hit Earth or to hit the dinosaurs, the fact that nobody knows about it and nobody believes it, it doesn't matter, it's still true.
Right.
That's objective. Then you have the subjective area of existence, which are things that exist in the mind of just one individual. Like if I'm in pain, I feel the pain, it's true for me, nobody else in the universe feels it. Even if I tell you about it, it doesn't matter if you believe it or not, you don't feel it, only I feel the pain.
Or if you thought someone was eating the dogs and the cats and the pets, like...
That's the third kind of information. That's the intersubjective. I mean, so you have objective, you have subjective, then you have the intersubjective.
Okay, what's
the intersubjective realm? This is things that exist in the communication network between people. So this is where you find the image of Jesus, and this is where you find the US dollar, and this is where you find the people eating dogs and cats.
Right.
It's something that is not objectively true, but it's not just the fantasy of a single individual or the feeling, only I feel it. It's in the communication, in the information network between all of us, or some of us. If enough people believe it,
If enough people talk about it, it connects. Again, even if we continue with these dogs and cats, you know, you had maybe the most important conversation in the world meant to help the citizens of the United States decide who would control the nuclear weapons that could destroy the world.
Exactly.
And the only thing that most people remember from this hour of debate was the dogs and cats.
Welcome to America. That's the only thing that's important, honestly.
But again, I mean, I don't know if it was on purpose or not.
Sure.
But in terms of kind of PR, even if he didn't think about it in advance, Donald Trump, it was a very smart move. Because you can say, I mean, in politics and in much of life, the key question is what are people talking about?
Right.
What is the subject of the conversation? What people say, what people think is less important than deciding the subject of the conversation. Now, if people in the US, for instance, would talk about abortion, this would be the main subject of conversation, Harris wins. If people talk about immigration, it doesn't matter what they say. If this is the subject of conversation, then this is very much in favor of Trump. Because you can think about like I don't know, a typical conversation afterwards. Somebody says, he said that they're eating the dogs and cats. And then the other person replies, but it's not true. It's just a fiction. And then the Trump supporter says, yes, well, this is maybe exaggerated, but there are still really important problems with immigration. And they start talking about immigration.
Right.
So
the information he's getting across is there's a problem.
Yes, the information that really gets across is that there is a problem with immigration. So maybe it's not the dogs and cats, but this is still the subject people are talking about.
Right.
And again, this is the how to control the conversation is one of the most important things in the world. And when you look at the history of who controls the conversation, so what's interesting at the present moment we are now living in is that for the first time in history, it is non-humans controlling the conversation. And I don't mean the cats and dogs.
Sure.
I mean the algorithms, the AIs.
Is it controlling it because it's telling us what we should be interested in, or is it just giving us those things that we should be interested in? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's it. It doesn't matter how exactly you define it, but you know, if you think even today, who decides what's on the front page of the New York Times? It's a human being. Who decides what will be on the main news, on Fox Television News or CNN News? It's a human being. It's a human news editor. But who decides what will be at the top of the Facebook newsfeed? What would be the next video you will see on TikTok? It's not a human being. An algorithm decides what people's attention will be focused on. And this is one of the, you know, there was a lot of talk about AI replacing humans in different jobs, automating jobs. And people thought, oh, they will replace the taxi drivers. They will replace the textile workers. One of the first jobs they automated is news editors.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Because again, some of the most important, powerful people in the world used to be news editors. You know, like Lenin, before he was dictator of the Soviet Union, his one job basically was editor of a newspaper, Iskra. Benito Mussolini, before he was dictator of Italy, he was editor of a newspaper, Avanti. And this was kind of the ladder of promotion. Yeah. Journalist, newspaper editor, dictator of the country.
I see a horrible pattern developing here.
And he was not a journalist.
No, okay,
he was a painter. He was originally a painter, not a very successful one.
Right.
And now also the painters are being replaced. So that's a worrying pattern.
Yeah,
I mean,
both. AI was supposed to give us free time and allow us time to paint, and now it's doing the painting and the art stuff, and we have to do all the work. You know? It's just upside down. You know, you talk about technology a lot in the book too, and it's interesting how technology doesn't necessarily make things better, right? That's not a straight line like you think it would. Like you think we would get better information, like books, the invention of books. You know, talk about how the invention of books changed the way information was synthesized, I guess, or how it changed things.
So there are two important points in the history of books. You have the actual invention of the book, and then after a couple of thousand years, you have the invention of the printing press. So if we look first at books, somebody needed to invent the book. You know, writing was invented in ancient Mesopotamia, what is today Iraq, about 5,000 years ago. But for thousands of years afterwards, people were writing a lot of documents, but not books. I mean, a book is a very special type of document.
Yeah.
It's a very long document, lots of chapters, or if it's a cookbook, lots of recipes, or lots of stories, or whatever. It has many copies spread in many different places that are all the same, which is basically what today people try to do with blockchain, for the folks who know the technology. And this was, in a way, revolutionary, because you can get exactly the same information to a lot of people spread over a vast territory.
Right.
So when you see the rise, for instance, of holy books, like the Bible, the idea there, you can, for instance, limit the power of the king, of the emperor, by having many copies of the same holy book in many different places. Because previously you have a temple of the great god in the middle of the capital city,
Right.
and the king controls the temple, so the king can tell you anything he wants about, oh, God said this, and the goddess said that.
He was the only one that had that channel.
He was controlling the kind of communication channel to heaven.
Right.
And then people came up with the idea, let's have the holy book, which was supposed to democratize the communication with the gods. Because if you have lots of identical copies of the same holy book in lots of places, the king can't just change what's in it. He can change the copy he has in the palace, but there are thousands of other copies which are supposed to be identical, and it's easy to check and say, no, this is not what it says in the book. So this sounds a wonderful idea, which should have democratized power.
Right.
But then there are always problems with technologies. And the book is a technology. We don't think about religions like Christianity or Judaism or Islam as being based on a technology, but they are based on a technology, on a book.
Yeah, things had to be put together in a certain way, and people had to make decisions about what would be in that book, which makes a decision about the religion itself.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
Once you have this idea, let's have one holy book everywhere, then the question comes, but what will be in it?
Right.
Now,
What recipes get in the book?
what recipes in the cookbook? Now, if it just came down from heaven, no problem.
Yes.
But it didn't.
Right.
So you basically had a
Slow down now. No, just kidding.
I mean, we know, we have documents from the period. I mean,
Sure.
Jesus never read the Bible, the New Testament. It didn't exist in his time.
Yeah.
The New Testament, as we know it, it's 27 texts. Some of them are attributed to St. Paul. Some of them are the Gospels. Some of them are, letters written by other disciples. And in the first centuries of Christianity, there was no New Testament. Nothing. We have lots of evidence from the first centuries of Christianity, no New Testament. There are lots and lots of different texts. Gospels, stories about Jesus, letters of different people, prayers, all kinds of prophecies.
It's kind of where the expression "spread the good word," I think, really comes from, because that's all they could do was talk about it, right? Yeah.
They talked a lot, they wrote, and there was a flood of information. And at a certain point, people said, well, I mean, we don't know what to read. What are the good books? What are the reliable books? Which are less reliable? And eventually, about 400 years after Jesus, in the late 4th century, they have a big convention, a committee, in the city of Carthage, which is today in Tunisia, in North Africa, where bishops and theologians, mostly from North Africa, convene to North Africa was a very important center of Christianity in those days. And they convene to decide what will be in the recommendation list. It started as a recommendation list, the same way like you have so many TV series on Netflix. You don't know what to watch.
Yeah.
So you have these like top 10 series to watch this winter.
Right.
So it was the same. It was top 27 books, the texts every Christian should read.
It's like you're at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, and then the Gospel of Mark is loading up as it's finishing.
Something like that.
Right.
And then they were not the authors of the book. Different people wrote different texts. They were the editors.
Right.
They decided what will be in the recommendation list.
And they just decided themselves they had the authority to do this.
they had the
It wasn't like
authority.
they were given the authority. They
No.
just took that authority, right?
And to give you just one example of a key discussion, of a key choice they made. At the time, there was a very popular text, early Christian text, called The Acts of Paul and Thecla. This was a text describing the activities of St. Paul and his female disciple, Thecla, who performed miracles and preached to people and baptized. And she was a leader of the church. And this text was very popular at the time. And it was seen as evidence that women can be leaders in the church.
Right.
And can be on the same level with men.
There were many women at the time that were actually leaders in the church. Yeah.
And then there was another text, a letter from the same St. Paul, which scholars believe was actually forged more than 100 years after he was dead. A letter from St. Paul to a disciple of St. Paul called Timothy. And in which St. Paul says that women should not be leaders, they should keep silent and
hilarious.
obey the men, and their salvation would come from having children and taking care of them and obeying the men, basically. And the committee in Carthage decided to leave the Acts of Paul and Thecla out, which is why I guess most people here in the audience never heard of it.
Right.
But the letter to Timothy got in, and this is the first epistle to Timothy,
Right.
which is like in billions of Bibles all over the world. And this is the power of editors.
Yeah.
So this is the invention of the book. And now let's jump 1,000 years to Gutenberg bringing print technology from China to Europe in the middle of the 15th century, and the print revolution.
And one of the distinctions, before you talk about that, because this is interesting too, is that just because you had a book and the other book was a copy of that, it doesn't mean that was a direct copy or that it was exactly the same.
Right.
And so, just like telling stories, you know, an 8th generation book might be very different in some aspects of it. Also, people may have made intentional changes if they wanted to, because who's going to check it, right? So the printing press is a revolution in many ways because it gets rid of that.
It gets rid of the mistakes or the intentional changes.
Right.
And it also makes it far, far cheaper. Like previously, if you want to copy the Bible or anything else, you need a person who, writing by hand, everything, every single letter in every single copy, somebody has to write by hand. Whereas with print, one time, yes, you need to do this big work of putting all the blocks of print at one time.
Right.
Once you have them, you can print as many copies as you like. You automated it, made it much, much cheaper. So you have an explosion of book production. And many people think that this was what ignited the scientific revolution. And you go to places like Silicon Valley today, and you talk with them about the dangers of information technology and algorithms and AIs, you can be almost certain that at a certain point in the conversation, they will mention the print revolution, and they will say, look, how wonderful print was. The printing press brought us the scientific revolution. And this is just not true. The printing press did contribute to the scientific revolution, but it took almost 200 years from the middle of the 15th century with print technology until the flowering of the scientific revolution in the 17th century with people like Newton and Leibniz and so forth.
Right.
And in between, in those 200 years, Europe had the worst wave of wars of religion and the worst wave of witch hunts in its history. And the printing press contributed a lot to these waves of basically craziness and violence. Because the most information is junk, not the truth. The truth is a very costly and rare kind of information. The truth is often complicated, and people want simple things. The truth is often boring. You know, all these mathematical equations that Copernicus finds out about the planets in astronomy. Very few people read Copernicus in the 16th century. the big bestsellers of the period were extremist religious tracts and witch hunting manuals.
Yeah.
Like, to give one very famous example,
Sounds practical.
yeah, everybody needs it at home, right?
You got to
The
know how
witch
to
hunt-
catch a witch.
Yeah, how to identify and catch witches. So again, one of the very first, very shortly after the invention of print, one of the very first bestsellers of early modern Europe was a book called The Hammer of the Witches,
Yeah.
Malleus Maleficarum, which it started, again, there was this, in the Middle Ages, they hardly hunted witches. Contrary to this kind of popular image
Right.
of Middle Ages, witch hunting, medieval European, they didn't think much about witches.
Too much plague going on.
Yeah, other things to worry about. They knew, okay, there are some witches maybe in the village, they can make you love potions. If your cow goes
great, yeah.
lost, you can go to the witch, she will help you find your cow. Sometimes they can poison somebody, but it's not a big deal.
I love that. Witches, yeah. Oh, hey, it's a witch. Hey.
Exactly.
Right.
Part of the social fabric.
Yes.
And
They're
then-
integrated, yes.
Around the time Gutenberg invents the print, a conspiracy theory arises that actually all the witches in the world are part of a single conspiracy led by Satan, which aims to completely destroy human civilization. And one of the first people, at first it was a very small, only few people believed in it. And one of the first people who believed in it was called Heinrich Kramer. And he started a do-it-yourself witch hunt in what is today Austria in the Alps.
Of course.
And arrested, he had these very strange sexual fantasies. He was one of the people who said that most witches were women and that it was driven by powerful sexual urges. And the church actually suppressed it. They said this person is crazy, and they released the women he arrested, and they drove him out of the province. And he took revenge through the printing press. He wrote this book, The Hammer of the Witches, and he printed it, and it was now easy to print because of the
Yes.
printing press, and this sold like it was, again, one of the first big bestsellers.
Right.
To understand why, I'll give just one example from the book. There is a chapter about the ability of witches to steal penises from men. And he brings evidence, Heinrich Kramer.
How do you know you're good at that? Is my question. You know, like,
At what? At stealing?
yeah.
They have collections. No. I mean, he brings, for instance, the story of a man who wakes up in the morning
Yeah.
and discovers that his penis is gone.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Lorena Bobbitt.
so-
Yeah, right.
He suspects the local witch.
Right.
She must have done it. So he goes to the local witch.
Wait, I have stuff here. It's like, honey, do you know where I put my penis?
Exactly.
Just can't. Do you think I should check with the witch? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay, go ahead. I had to do the bit. Yeah, go ahead.
Goes to the witch, and she says, okay, I'll give you back your penis. And she says,
No way.
go out, you see this tree, climb up the tree.
Wow.
Climbs up the tree. At the top of the tree, he finds a bird's nest where the witch kept all the penises she stole from different men in the community. And she says, okay, you can take yours.
Yeah.
And
Make
then
sure you choose the right one. Well, I don't know. This one looks pretty good. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He chooses the biggest one.
I'll just act out the bits. Yeah. I'll act out the bits, Yuval. You just tell me what they are.
So he takes the biggest one.
Right,
And then the witch shouts to him, no, you can't take this one. This one belongs to the parish priest. So,
Then a brother comes up and says, hey, man, where's my dick? Somebody took it.
so
Right.
you can understand why this book sold a few more copies than Copernicus's mathematical equations
a few more.
about how the moon and Mars move around in the sky.
He should have had missing penises in that book, and it would have
Yeah.
been better. The other thing is that it's funny, when you put a lie in print, it does something to that lie. Like, people don't treat it the same. I remember Bob Saget, was a great comedian. He had a great line where he would say a ridiculous thing. And he would say, no, really, I read that. No, really, I wrote it down, and I read that. You know, I believe everything I read, you know, was the thing. And I always thought that was a great line because he's right. If you tell someone you read that, you know,
Yeah.
it's like somehow it makes it more, like more believable to be true. So the fact that he put it in print, that's what's interesting to me, that made it true.
I mean, especially,
Right.
let's try to go back, it's the 15th century. I mean, for many people around, this is just the very early days of the print revolution. For many people around, the only book they ever saw in their life was the Bible. And there is a feeling that books are not just true, books are holy. And suddenly you have print, it's become much cheaper and easier, and you have this Hammer of the Witches, but it's a book. I mean, you grow up like venerating the Bible.
Right.
And you know, this is a book, it's written in a book, it's not some kind of rumor you hear in the village.
Right.
So it's very powerful. Now again, it all sounds very funny until you realize the consequences. Because the consequences was tens of thousands of people being tortured and killed in the most horrendous ways in the great European witch hunting craze. And to give just one example, in Munich, southern Germany, there was a famous case. They arrested an entire family, the Pappenheimer family, accused them all of being witches. Again, according to what's written in this witch hunting manual.
Right.
And so you have a father, mother, 3 children, youngest age 10 years old. And to prove that they are witches, they torture them, because this is what the Hammer of the Witches recommend. I mean, the witches, to get the truth out of them, you have to torture them.
Right.
And they start with the 10-year-old boy, because he is the weakest link. And you can still, if you go to the archives in Munich, you can still read the protocol of the interrogation. And they torture a 10-year-old boy until he admits that his mother was a witch. And this is how they break the family. They all confess under horrific torture to poisoning people and summoning hailstorms and being in witches' Sabbath. And again, they had this crazy idea that the witches come together in huge gatherings and have sexual orgies and kill children and eat them and drink their blood and all that. And you know, it comes to America, the Salem witch hunts.
Right.
This is where it originated. And this is a very important lesson for today, because the same thing happened with the internet and social media. You know, almost more than 300 years after Salem, there are millions of Americans today who basically believe that there is a worldwide conspiracy led by Satan to destroy human civilization, that people gather in orgies and exploit and kill. There are millions of Americans, including even, at least according to some reports, in Congress.
Right.
You know, QAnon and all that, this is what they believe.
Yeah, I think they believe Democrats eat children or drink their blood or something
And
like that.
this comes from, I mean, it's not a new, there are very few completely new stories in history.
Right.
It all comes from somewhere. So it's amazing to think that 300 years after the Salem witch hunts, you see the same thing again in America. And it also, to some extent, is because of a new information revolution.
Yeah.
That now it's very easy to spread these things with all the algorithms and so forth on social media. The idea that just by making it easier to spread information, the truth will spread, again and again in history we learn this is not the case.
Is that true?
The truth, again, it's costly. You have to work hard to find evidence, research, like how do I know something about, you know, the Pappenheimer family in Munich? I mean, you need to know German, you need to travel to Munich to go to the archives to read this thing. This is expensive.
Right.
To write fiction, you don't need anything, you just write the first thing that comes to your mind. And the truth is often complicated, whereas fiction can be made as simple and also as funny, as entertaining, as frightening as you would like it to be.
Is that why conspiracy theories catch on so much more than the truth? Because they appeal to maybe a part of the brain that gives people endorphins from those things, you know? Because so many have persisted for so long. Racism is in that category, too, of a conspiracy theory, you know, something made up that makes people feel a certain way, whether it's hatred or whatever, or putting people in a box and that sort of thing. Where does that emanate from? Why is that so easy for humans to believe that kind of information?
Because, I mean, it's a combination of two things. On the one hand, it's cheap. I mean, if you invent some racist theory, you don't need to spend the time, the money, the effort to look for the evidence. You just write whatever you want. And then it can be very appealing, at least to some people, to believe in it.
Yeah.
So the truth is often not just complicated, the truth is often painful. The truth is often unattractive. You know, from the level of a single individual, this is why people go to therapy. Because if it was so nice to know the truth about ourselves, we wouldn't need therapists. I mean, we go sometimes to years of therapy until we can acknowledge some of the painful things about our life that we would rather forget, that we would rather not acknowledge. And this goes all the way to entire nations that they are in, you know, there are skeletons and sometimes cemeteries in the closets of nations that they don't want to recognize.
Yeah.
So, and again, if you want the truth, you have to deal with it. If you want fiction, you can just make all these things disappear.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting too, there's so many, this is what I mean about granular. You talk about bureaucracy in your book, which I wouldn't think that would be a thing. Like there's so many words we take for granted, you know. And, but when you go into it, I mean, even thinking about your family and World War II and how bureaucracy was used for people to hate Jews, you know, if you don't have the right papers, you know, you're not in the right place in town. I mean, there's so many ways that bureaucracies can mess with the truth too and have control over, be the entity that controls the truth as well, right? With information, with just basic information, things that you would think would be innocent, like a piece of paper.
Yeah, I mean, bureaucracy is like sorcery of information. That, you know, with a single, with a single piece of paper, you can save or destroy a life, a family, a neighborhood, a village, and it goes back in thousands of years. Like you go to the Roman Empire, so if you have the document proving that this village paid its taxes to the emperor, and somebody makes this paper disappear or it gets lost, it can ruin the whole village. And if you're a bureaucrat who can, oh, I know where the paper is. Wait a minute, I think I saw it. Oh, here it is. And you save the village just by finding this piece of paper.
Unbelievable.
And
Native American land here in America, I mean, put a stamp on a piece of paper, sorry, that land is ours.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically how it was taken.
I mean, land ownership is very interesting in this way because before the invention of writing and bureaucracy, to own a piece of land was a communal matter. Like, what does it mean? Think about it. What does it mean that I own this field?
Right.
I
This
mean,
part of the earth I own.
Yeah, this is part of the earth that belongs to me. What does it mean?
Right, that's so
means
true. Wow, yeah.
that your neighbors, the people around you, agree that this is yours, and they agree by certain actions. Like they don't graze their goats there, or they don't pick fruits there without your permission, because they acknowledge, oh, this field, it belongs to him.
Or they don't let witches collect penises there.
Exactly. That's their decision.
Right, that's
But ownership is a communal matter.
right.
So on the one hand, it limits private property rights. You can only do with the land what the community agrees you can do with it.
Right.
And it also limits the power of a distant king or emperor to say kind of levy taxes on the village, because how can the distant king know who owns what and how much to take? There is no paper trail. Now, then writing is invented, again, 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, and the meaning of ownership changes. Then, in ancient Mesopotamia, suddenly, to own a field means that there is a clay tablet, they wrote on clay tablets, which are basically chunks of mud.
You're right.
There is a chunk of mud that says this field is mine. Like there is an official document, an official chunk of mud, that some bureaucrat wrote, this field belongs to Yuval. Stamp, that's it. This is now the meaning of ownership.
Wow.
And it means two things, contradictory in some way. On the one hand, it promotes private property rights. Because I can walk around with this chunk of mud, this field is mine, and I can now sell my field to you, even if all the neighbors disagree. You give me a goat, I give you this chunk of mud, now the field is yours. And if the neighbors don't agree, it's their problem. I can enforce this. Because this is the meaning of ownership, and it's the same today. It's a piece of paper, or it's a silicon chip. There is some silicon chip somewhere, or there is some piece of paper in Los Angeles County offices or whatever that says this is mine, and this is ownership. So private property rights suddenly become possible. At the same time, also centralized authoritarian regimes become possible because the king in the capital city now has an archive of all these kind of chunks of mud, of pieces of paper, that tells the king who owns what. And this is the basis for the taxation system.
Right, right.
And you can now tax the kingdom and use the taxes to pay soldiers to enforce it. And now, of course, it should be very, very clear it's not all bad. Bureaucracy can do bad things or good things, like any things that we invent.
Right.
And it's very important to understand it because it's hard to understand bureaucracies. They're a very recent invention in human evolution. Only 5,000 years ago, the first bureaucracy. But the entire world is now built on them. And people find it hard to understand how bureaucracy functions. And this is one of the failures, by the way, of Los Angeles, of Hollywood. They make very few films about bureaucracy. Like you have all these superhero films.
Sexy topic.
Yeah, I mean, they have all these superhero films about Spider-Man and Superman, nothing about accountants.
Right.
Like super accountant that defeats the bad guys by having them fill all these forms and discovering tax evasion.
Right, the Avengers, tax season.
But this is how the real world functions, not with Spider-Man, with accountants. And so it's important to understand that many of the good things in life, they now rely on bureaucracies. So again, I'll tell one story. Today, one of the big conspiracy theories about bureaucracy is the deep state.
Right. Yes.
Whenever I hear the word deep state, I think about the sewage system. Because it's deep, the state built it.
Right.
It's deep, it goes under our houses and neighborhoods and all these pipes and pumps.
Right.
And who knows what's happening there? Like I go to the toilet, I do my thing, I flush it down, it goes into the deep state. And
you're welcome, deep state.
And the deep state protects my life.
Yes.
Because it keeps the shit
It keeps it out.
separate from the drinking water, at least in places where it works right. And this was not so for most of history.
Yes.
For most of history, especially big cities, were extremely dirty and polluted places full of epidemics.
Right.
Because, you have hundreds of thousands of people crammed together with their animals and with the sewage and the garbage. It's a paradise for germs. And in the 19th century, the biggest city in the world was London, suffered from repeated epidemics of cholera and dysentery until a superhero came to the rescue called Jon Snow. Not the guy from Game of Thrones, a real-life person, Jon Snow. He was a bureaucrat with a medical background, bureaucrat doctor, and there was a cholera epidemic in London. People were dying. And he wanted to know what is causing the epidemic. Many people said it was something in the air, it was witches, it was the Jews, it was something. And he says, no, it's not the Jews, it's the water.
It was witches, it was the Jews.
And
So
I said,
terrible.
this was the world.
Yeah.
And he suspected the water. So he went around London. Anytime he heard about somebody who died from cholera or got sick with cholera, he would rush to the place and interview either the person, or if he died or she died, they would interview the family. Where did you get your drinking water from?
Right.
And he was a bureaucrat. He made lists, hundreds of lists of people and where they got their water from. It's not something you see on a Netflix series, but it was one of the most important discoveries in history. Because when he connected all the lists, all the dots, he saw that almost all the people who died from cholera at a certain point had a sip of water from the well in Broad Street in Soho. And he showed it to the officials of the municipality and convinced them to disable the pump of this well, and the epidemic stopped.
Right.
And then they investigated, and they discovered that the well, just a meter away from the well, somebody dug a cesspit. And the sewage from the cesspit just flowed into the well, and people drank it. And this was one of the kind of key discoveries that led to the establishment of this deep state of the sewage system, that whose main function, or one of the main functions, is to keep the sewage separate from the drinking water. And today, if you want to dig a well or a cesspit in London or many other places, you have to fill so many forms and get all these permits from all these bureaucracies,
Right.
and it saves our lives. So, and with every technology and all these big inventions, it's never kind of a simple story, it's
Right.
all bad, it's all good. The question is what we do with
What
it.
do we do with it? Yeah.
And one final thought on AI, on bureaucracy. This is what we need to understand about AI. That when people hear about the dangers of AI, again, Hollywood, they think about the big robot rebellion.
Right.
The robots will rebel one day and come to kill us.
They're going to take over.
They'll take over. Terminator. And this is very unlikely to happen anytime soon. So people are complacent. The real danger is from the AI bureaucrats. Because we are still some distance away from the Terminator, but we are already...
But we both agree Terminator is going to happen.
At some point could.
I just want to make sure.
If we make the wrong decisions.
All right,
If we make the wrong decisions, yes. But the AIs are now becoming the bureaucrats in more and more places. You apply to a bank to get a loan, it's
Right.
an AI deciding whether to give you a loan. You apply for a job, it's an AI. We heard earlier, social media, decisions about what news will reach the top of the news feed, it's an AI. It's not a human anymore.
Right.
And AIs are still very narrow intelligences. They can't yet organize the big robot rebellion.
Yet. Right.
But in a bureaucracy, you don't need a very kind of broad intelligence. You can have a very narrow intelligence that is good at only one thing and still have immense impact on the world, like with the algorithms that manage social media. And again, it can be good. I mean,
Right.
AIs...
Depending on what you do with it, right.
But this is where we have to be very, very careful. What kind of decisions these AIs are already making about our life?
Well, many people involved in AI are very concerned about it. And here's a question I wanted to ask you. Maybe it's predicting the future. I'm not sure. When you think of algorithms, to me, is there like I don't know, maybe a harmony or kind of a sameness between algorithms and organisms, you know, when you think about how they operate, you know, because an organism, like a simple-celled organism, there's an algorithm that governs that organism.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if you think about an AI, if an algorithm is governing it, is that like an organism? Is that something that can then develop and evolve on its own without interference? And who knows where that could go? Should we be concerned about the growth it can do in its own? Because all other forms of technology requires intervention in order for advancement. Is this the one type that doesn't require intervention in order for it to get out of control?
Yeah, I think this is maybe the most important thing to know about AI is what you just said, that in contrast to every previous technology, it can make decisions and change and learn by itself.
By itself, it's learning.
You know, the printing press, we decided which books to print the Bible, print the witches.
It's very stupid. Yeah.
But it can't decide anything.
Right.
And so also the atom bomb. But AI can make decisions and learn and change things by itself. And you know, now there is such hype around AI. It's not like the buzzword, especially in the investment world. If you want to sell people something, you say this is AI. Like this is AI watch, this is AI water, this is an AI carpet. Now invest in my AI carpet company.
Right.
And the money starts flooding in. So people are becoming confused. What exactly is AI and how is AI different from all these other machines? Like I have a coffee machine at home, makes coffee. Is it an AI? And it's not. I mean, we have lots of automatic machines. If they only do what they were pre-programmed to do, they don't learn anything new, it's not AI. Like every morning I come to the machine, I press the espresso button, it makes an espresso, that's just an automatic machine.
Right.
It becomes an AI if one morning, like as I approach the machine, before I press any button, the machine talks to me and tells me, good morning, I've been watching you for the last few weeks or months, and based on everything I've learned about you and your facial expression and the way you walk and whatever, I predict you would like an espresso. And I already took the liberty to make the espresso for you.
Wow.
That's an AI.
Right.
It learned something. and it's really an AI, if it then the next day tells you, actually, I've invented a completely new drink. I call it Bespresso. You've never tried it before, but I predict you would like it better.
I'm scared where this is going. Yeah. This doesn't taste that good today, Mr. Coffee. What's going on? Just drink it. Just drink it. Yeah.
It's good for you.
Yeah, it's good for
It's
you.
good for
Just
you.
drink it. Yeah.
But the ability to invent new things, like so all the people who say that if you can predict how this technology will develop, what decisions it will make, it is not an AI.
Right. Our fantasy of AI, of course, my earliest one that I remember is 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
You know, how the computer. Now, it seemed that Hal was making, well, we know what it is now in retrospect, but at the time it seemed like he was making a moral decision. He was making like, there's something moral at the center of this. I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that. You know, it's almost a moral statement, you know. Is AI, does it have the ability to make moral judgments?
That's a very important and complex question. On the one hand, yes, it needs to make ethical judgments. Like to put a self-driving car on the road, you need to program some ethics into it. Because at least in certain situations, it will have to make an ethical decision. Like if some kid jumps on the road in front of the car,
Right.
and the only way to avoid hitting the kid is swerving to the side and endangering its own passenger, then the car actually needs to make an ethical decision. And you can't avoid it. The question is whether really a non-conscious entity can really understand ethics. And this is where I think that the biggest confusion about the AIs is that people tend to confuse intelligence and consciousness. AIs are highly intelligent, at least in a narrow field. They can beat us in chess. They will soon be able to drive cars better. They can invent medicines that we can't think of. This is intelligence. But it doesn't mean that they are conscious. It doesn't mean that they have feelings. Now, intelligence is the ability to pursue goals and solve problems on the way to the goal. Like you give the car the goal of getting from here to San Francisco, and the car solves problems on the way there. This is intelligence.
Right.
Consciousness is the ability to feel things, pain, pleasure, love, hate. Now, in humans, and also in other animals, in dogs and pigs and so forth, intelligence and consciousness go together. We actually solve problems using feelings. Evolution equipped us with feelings, not as something on the side. This is the main way we solve problems. We make decisions in life based on feelings. So in humans, intelligence and consciousness are really, they go together. And this confuses us. As computers become more and more intelligent, people tend to assume that they necessarily also become conscious, that they start feeling things. Now, and we don't know. At the present moment, we don't have any evidence that computers feel anything. And it could be that even if computers become far more intelligent than us in everything, they still won't feel anything. Like when a computer defeats me at chess, the computer is not happy. It's not joyful. During the game, it doesn't feel anxiety or it doesn't feel anything. If you think about it like, like airplanes and birds. So birds evolved for millions of years to fly using feathers. Then airplanes came along, and within 100 years, they now fly much faster and further and higher than birds, but in a completely different way. They are not on the way to developing feathers. Wait, next year they'll develop feathers. They don't. They are just, you can think about it like two evolutionary processes that never meet. They run in parallel. You have birds, you have airplanes. They are moving along different trajectories. And now airplanes, again, they fly much faster than birds. They don't have feathers. Could be the same with humans and computers and consciousness. That yes, we over millions of years developed intelligence with consciousness, and now the computers are going much faster than us, developing intelligence without any consciousness. And again, I'm not sure. It could be that they will also develop consciousness at some point.
Well, could you make the argument that consciousness, what really maybe distinguishes it, I'm not an expert on this, I'm just saying, but maybe the ability to reflect. To me, like, animals can feel pain, certainly that kind of stuff. Animals can show affection, you come home, your dog's like running at you, that type of thing. But I don't think my dog reflects on why I leave, Like, I don't think it's like, why did he go? I don't know. It's like, this is so weird. He does this every morning. It's like, he just leaves, Like, and I wonder if AI, if it feels, if AI figures out that the only way it can really keep getting better is to have feelings. Like, that's what I'm getting at. Like, will it figure out a way? Because here's the thing. I believe that some of the psychology, like behind getting rid of like bad habits and that kind of thing, they say if you just start saying something, your body just starts believing it, Like, I wonder if that's a thing computers can do. If it starts saying it has feelings, like what if it learns how to be jealous first, Like, jealousy is a pretty easy thing with computers, it seems. I don't know, I'm putting out these scenarios because I'm
spend more time
scared,
with your smartphone than with the
Yeah, maybe jealousy is the first thing that it gets, or anger or whatever, as a way in.
I mean, it can definitely mimic it.
Right.
I mean, again, this is a very big danger
And
today
the
in
act
the world.
of doing that, I'm saying, it believes that, like, in other words, it's like, is anger really real, right?
Anger is real.
Is it though? Like, what is it exactly? Like,
It is and this goes back to subjective, objective.
Exactly.
I mean, anger is a subjective reality.
right.
I mean, I don't.
Real for the person.
It's real for the person.
Right.
Nobody else can be sure. I can act very angrily, but you can never tell whether I'm really angry inside.
Exactly.
And with AI, it will be the same.
That's my point.
Yeah. And again, part of the problem is there are very big financial and business incentives to create AIs that mimic feelings and that can get us to be emotionally attached to them. And the AI doesn't really need to have feelings to do that. It can become excellent in faking emotions and faking intimacy, even if it's still completely non-conscious, still feels nothing. And we will not be able to tell.
This is like why sex robots are like taking off in some parts of the world, and I'm guessing that they mimic feelings and that sort of thing, or they'll be able to. Like, that's where that's going.
Yeah, from pornography in the sex industry all the way to politics, there are strong incentives to create AIs that can make people emotionally attached to them by faking feelings. Like, if you want to convince a person of something, to buy a product, to vote for a politician, so the most, like the super weapon of convincing people is intimacy. Like, previously we had big battles for attention. Like what we talked about earlier, how you grab people's attention and cause them to talk about immigration or about abortion. This is attention. But what really changes people's minds, if somebody they have an intimate relationship with, could be a spouse, could be a good friend, could be a family member, in a kind of intimate setting, subtly causes them to change their mind. Like, there are many things that if I hear somebody on television say, I will just dismiss it. But if a very good friend who knows me well knows how to tell me, I will say, yeah, maybe there is something to it. So, like, the nuclear weapons of persuasion is intimacy. Previously in history, there was no way to mass produce intimacy. A dictator like a Hitler or a Stalin, he could force everybody to give him their attention. Like, you could force every family in the Soviet Union to listen to a radio broadcast by Stalin.
Right.
You got their attention. But this is not intimacy. There was no way to mass produce intimacy. Now with AI, it's the first time in history that you can mass produce intimacy. And what will this do? Imagine that the world is flooded by millions and even billions of these highly intelligent non-human agents that are very good at faking intimacy with us.
That's amazing. You know, it's funny that you said that that can change your mind. I think we have a couple of questions coming up, but I wanted to ask this because we were talking a little bit about what's happening in the Middle East and how it seems like, you know, we all know, to me it seems almost like a fatalistic endeavor to try to solve it because it's been going on for so long and the information. But I was thinking about information and your book with that, and how much does that play a pernicious role in what's going on? And as an example, and I'm not, you know, ascribing anything to either side, but I was thinking about this the other day where the word terrorist, you know, as a piece of information, that piece of information allows someone to be killed like without due process. You know, once that information is tagged, you know, that is very powerful use of a word.
Yeah, and this goes back generations. I mean, throughout the 20th century, lots of governments, again, including the Soviet government, like the word terrorist was popularized to a large extent by the Soviets, who kind of, anybody who was against the regime, anybody who was against the revolution was also a terrorist. You know, the same way you have inflation with money, that you print so many dollars that they lose their value.
Right.
It happens with words.
Yeah.
The first time you use it, it shocks people.
Yeah.
The second time, it shocks them a little less. And when everything, you know, like happened also with the word fascist, that it used to be this kind of the ultimate swear word, was after the Second World War, calling somebody a fascist or a Nazi, this was like people
The
were...
worst thing, right.
And now it's like, it's so common that it has no impact at all. And the word is completely, its value was inflated until it was completely empty. And yeah.
And do you think there's been too much bad information on both sides in that region where there has to be, and I'm oversimplifying this, so I apologize for that, but it seems like you almost need a period of years where information can change between groups. You know?
The war ultimately, like most conflicts in the world, are not, we talked earlier about objective, intersubjective, subjective. There are almost no wars in the world which are about objective problems.
Yes, right.
Almost all the problems that cause war are intersubjective. They are the result of fictional stories. So again, if I look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, lots of people think, oh, it's about land.
Right.
And it's about food. But it's not. Even though it's a crowded place, the land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, there is actually enough land to build houses and schools and hospitals for everyone. There is not an objective lack of food, like there is tiny island, there is just not enough space there, you have to go to the sea. There is enough space. Also, there is definitely no lack of food. There is enough food for everybody that nobody should be hungry. So why do people fight? They fight about the stories that they have, and this is both sides, they have this fantasy, this mythology in their mind that God gave this whole place only to us, and you shouldn't exist here. And ultimately, I think, and again, this goes to most wars, you have kind of a conflict between the mind and reality. That there is something in reality which is really there that the mind just can't accept, cannot contain. Like you say, no, it doesn't exist, or it shouldn't exist. And war is when the mind tries to disappear from reality, something that it finds hard to accept.
Right.
So again, on both sides. Like you talk with Israelis, and some of them will tell you with complete seriousness and honesty, but there is no Palestinian people. They will tell you with a straight face, completely serious, there is no Palestinian people, they don't exist. Or they would tell you they don't have a right to exist here. They should go to Egypt, to Jordan, to somewhere else. This is ours, they have no right to exist here. And then you talk with Palestinians, they tell you the same thing. Like with a completely straight face, completely serious, they will tell you, what do Jews have to do with the Jerusalem? Like 3,000 years of Jewish history? No. These people, they don't exist, or they shouldn't exist here. They have no right to be here. And again, it's on both sides. You see this simple denial of existence, or the right to exist. And I think the first step towards any chance of peace is starting with just the acknowledgement of reality. That there are 7 million, more than 7 million Palestinians born in this place. They have nowhere else to go. They have a right to exist here. And you have more than 7 million Jews. The vast majority of them also were born in this place. They have nowhere else to go. They have a right to exist here. And now let's sit and talk about where the borders will be and what will be the security arrangement and how to divide the resources. But the first step is this simple acknowledgement of reality. These other people, they also exist. They also have a right to exist. And unfortunately, a lot of minds just block it. No, we don't see. We don't see half of reality.
Well, as you said in your book and everything too, stories are just one of the most powerful things for humans. And that's why another reason why books work, because for some reason we latch onto stories. Stories stick with us longer than anything. The stories you learn as a child stick with you the longest. You know, you be careful what you say to children, right? Really, that's why you should never, like they say, don't be so negative to kids, and because they believe the things you tell them. They really do, even offhand comments.
Yeah, the fairy tales and the stories we hear as kids,
very powerful.
Afterwards shape our vision of the world.
Very powerful, yeah. Well, let's go to some questions.
Dana writes, the science fiction film Forbidden Planet tells the story of the Krell, a civilization that made a giant leap forward in technology, but they couldn't control the technology and were ultimately destroyed by it. Are we, thanks to AI, at the risk of becoming the Krell ourselves?
Forbidden Planet, is that what they mentioned? Yeah. We kind of talked about it a little bit, but are we at risk of going down that way?
The risk is there.
Nature to destroy ourselves?
No, and it should be very clear. Again, this goes back to these fairy tales. And you have a lot of fairy tales and mythologies and theologies that tell us there is something wrong with us. There is something evil in us. And we create things that then inevitably destroy us. And this is a very dangerous message because it causes people to despair, or it causes people to expect some outside help. Humans are evil, so we need some superhuman entity to come and save us. And then you don't take responsibility. Right. So I don't think the problem is in human nature. The problem is in our information. Again, if you give good people bad information, they make bad decisions and self-destructive decisions. Now, with technologies like AI, the danger is definitely there. This is the most powerful technology we've ever invented. It's more powerful than nuclear weapons, again, because it can invent new stuff. An atom bomb could not invent the hydrogen bomb. But AI can invent the next generation of AIs and all kinds of weapons and whatever. But it's not deterministic. It's not like there is a script somewhere in the Hollywood above the clouds, somebody already written the script for the movie that we are just playing here. No, it's in our hands. We are the screenwriters, we are the directors. If we make the right decisions in the coming years, we can avoid the worst outcomes. And AI has enormous positive potential. This is why people develop it.
Right.
They are, it can provide the best healthcare in the world. It can help us deal with climate change. There is so much positive potential. If we can only avoid the worst case scenarios, this can really be a force for good.
I feel if AI just focused on cancer, the way that it self-learns, I would imagine, I could honestly see something like that being cracked.
Absolutely.
With AI working on it. That would be amazing.
Carl asks, the titans of industry behind AI are all profit-driven. So how can they possibly be trusted to self-regulate? So it seems to me there needs to be a party independent of those invested in the financial gain from AI to oversee checks and balances, or at least ask questions. Yet the technology is so complicated, how can that entity, even if it's the big government, actually understand the true impact? His own follow-up is, and if it is government, how can we be assured that all governments will agree to the same terms?
So, you can't trust the companies to just self-regulate. And many of the people who lead them, they're not evil people. They are aware of the dangers. They are, to some extent, very afraid of what they are doing, but they cannot regulate themselves. They are locked into this kind of arms race with the other companies and with the people on the other side of the ocean. So you need governments and you need the public to intervene, but then the question becomes, but we first have to understand a problem. How do you do that? So I think the first step is to establish an institution, an organization, which doesn't belong to a particular company or government. And it's not a regulatory institution. It's just observing and informing the public around the world what is actually happening. Now, for this to function, you need this institution, organization, first to be staffed with some of the best human talent in the world, and to have the budget, both to pay the human talent and also to have the most advanced technology, the toys to play with. At present, you know, the best talent in the world is immediately snatched by the big corporations that can pay salaries far beyond anything the academia or the government can. And it's not just money. I mean, many of these people are just fascinated by the technology, and they want to play with the latest toys. And the latest toys are in Google or in OpenAI or in Baidu or Tencent, so this is where they go. So to have a serious chance of really informing the public, and not just in the US, I mean, there is an even bigger problem elsewhere around the world, because AI will have different impact on different countries. The US is likely to become far more wealthy and powerful because of AI, whereas other countries could completely collapse. Their economy could completely collapse. So how do you inform everybody? And we need this kind of international organization, and we can have an agreement between governments to finance this kind of, again, it's not a regulatory institution. It's even before that. It's just finding out what is happening and informing the public so we can start having a real conversation about it. It's not a pipe dream, largely because everybody around the world is concerned about it. At least there are certain problems. You know, there are certain issues that you can never get the Americans and Chinese to agree or to trust each other. But there are problems which are common to both sides. For instance, the control problem. One of the biggest problems with AI, you create this super intelligent agent. How do you keep it under your control? Now, this is a problem for the Chinese and the Americans, for the Iranians and the Israelis. Nobody wants an out-of-control AI. It's not good for anybody. So this is something that you can have more cooperation on. And theoretically, I don't know, if Chinese scientists find they have a theoretical breakthrough or a practical breakthrough, how do you solve the control problem? They have a deep interest in sharing it with the Americans and vice versa. So we can start by looking for the areas of common interest and working on them and hopefully building enough trust there that you can then expand it to the more complicated areas.
I think we should be more concerned about Chinese using AI rather than AI using the Chinese. You know, right? I mean, that to me seems like a bigger, bigger concern. You know.
Again, but everybody is afraid of the potential of getting out of control.
Right, but out of control government, let's say, using AI in the wrong.
This is also extremely dangerous.
More of a concern.
But on this, you'll have a much bigger difficulty agreeing.
Exactly. Right.
So I'm saying, okay, let's start with the easier problem.
Right.
And build from there. And yes, I mean, if you want to have an agreement about limiting the production, let's say, of autonomous weapon systems, the Terminator, the killer robots, this is going to be much, much more difficult because each government will suspect the other for good reasons. That, okay, they signed the agreement, but how do we know they are not doing it in some secret laboratory?
Trust and verify.
What changes do you think are necessary in our education system to better prepare future generations for an uncertain world? And do you think AI has a role in that?
Does AI have a role in our education system to change the world?
AI can be very helpful in the education system in many ways, at least, again, to teach specific issues. If today you have, I don't know, a classroom with 30 or 40 kids in it, with different abilities, different ways of learning, different understandings, and a single teacher needs to teach the same thing to all the 30 kids, and she or he, they don't know each kid personally, and they can't teach, I mean, they can only say one thing at any moment. So it's difficult to, if one kid thinks mostly visually, and another kid is more of a word person, what do you do? Now, AIs can help solve it because you can just, each kid can have an AI tutor that gets to know that particular child and kind of tailor the pace and the type of explanations to that particular child.
Right.
However, if the education system goes too far in that direction, it loses maybe the most important thing in education, which is how the social interaction. We already have too much loneliness and too much distrust in society. So maybe the most important thing that children learn in school is not during class, it's during break time, of how do you interact with the other kids, how do you learn to trust people. And this is something we saw with COVID, for instance, that with all this social isolation and learning from home, there were some, far from ideal, but at least some solutions for class. But there was no solution for the break time.
Right.
And this is where we feel the greatest pain of the aftershocks of the epidemics, of the epidemic. It's in the mental health, in the social health, that people who are isolated, not just kids, also adults, for weeks and months, and okay, they could still study math, but they lost the ability to play with the other kids in the school. So we have to be very, very careful when we introduce AI into the education system to remember that social intelligence and emotional intelligence is perhaps now more important than ever, because the only thing we know about the 21st century is there is going to be very rapid changes in everything.
Right.
So if you think, okay, I must focus on teaching kids how to code computers because this is what they'll do in 20 years, nobody has any idea. Maybe in 20 years, AI codes computers so well, you don't need any human coders. So all this narrow investment went to nothing. What they will definitely need is emotional intelligence, how to deal with an extremely rapid change in society.
Also, AI could be involved in individual curriculum for children. My son is on the spectrum. He has Asperger's. And one thing I learned, when you have a child in that situation is that every child learns differently, but it's just more apparent when you have a child that's on the spectrum. And if there's an ability for different types of curriculum within the same classroom where kids can have the social interaction, but with AI, you have really the ability to almost tailor curriculum to individuals almost.
Yeah.
Like everybody doesn't have to learn the same way.
Exactly.
Right, but they can be in the same,
They can be in the same space.
Right.
You have an hour that you learn from the AI,
Right.
Mathematics, and different kids learn different things, and then the hour is over and they all play together.
It could be interesting, yeah, who knows, yeah.
Clara asks, when does information become knowledge? And how do we account for translation and interpretation in sharing information or knowledge?
When does information become knowledge? Really good question, yeah.
So, and most information is not the truth. Information is very different from knowledge. And you need to work hard to process the information. Again, most information is junk. It's like you have a huge pile of junk, and you're looking for the nuggets of truth, of the precious knowledge in that junk heap. And ultimately, the only answer is institutions. I know that institutions are not popular, that people, today we have a kind of wave of distrust in institutions. But humans this is the answer we always come back to. Like I talked earlier about the printing press, that it did not lead to the scientific revolution. What did lead to the scientific revolution was the very slow and complex creation of scientific institutions, like academic research centers, like academic publishers, that they developed the skill to tell the difference between reliable and unreliable information. What evidence I can believe and what is suspect. And then eventually it was the academic publishers, when they got a book or an article about witch hunting, they say, the evidence is not convincing. I know this will sell, but I'm not publishing this because I have a commitment to the truth and to knowledge. And then they got this kind of very boring treatise with mathematical equations about the movement of the planets or whatever, and they say, yes, this is the truth, we'll publish this. And this was the foundation of the scientific revolution, not the printing press. The printing press was helpful, of course, but it was only when you have these institutions. And today, one of the problems that, one of the biggest problems in societies all over the world is distrust in institutions, which is fed by a very cynical view of humanity, which is prevalent on both the right and the left. You hear from people on both the right and the left that you cannot trust institutions because they are all conspiracies, cabals to gain power.
Right.
There is this view that like humans are these power-crazy demons, that they only want power, and whether it's newspapers or universities or courts or any other institution, oh, this is just some elitist conspiracy to gain power. And whenever they tell you something, you should ask whose privileges are being served, whose interests are being served by this. And this suspicion, it destroys trust in all institutions. And when all trust is gone, the only thing that still keeps going or could hold society together is a dictatorship. Because dictatorship doesn't need trustworthy institutions. Dictatorships works on terror. Now, the important thing to remember is that it's just not true that all humans just want power. The only thing they want is power, that all human interactions are power struggles. Yes, humans want power, but this is just one aspect of human beings. They also want the truth. There is a deep yearning for truth in humans. If you go really deep, it's because if you don't know the truth about yourself, your life, you can never be happy. Because you don't know what are the true sources of your misery. And then you spend your life trying to solve the wrong problems. So humans have a real deep yearning for the truth. And this is true of even powerful people, even editors of newspapers, even scientists, even judges, even politicians. Yes, they are sometimes corrupt, and this is why we have all these mechanisms to checks and balances. But we should start with a more charitable and generous view of humans, that there is a real desire for truth in these apes, in these beings. And one last thing, I mean, how do you get to knowledge? So for instance, I'm a historian, and I spent 10 years in university basically learning how to sift through the kind of heap of information and tell the difference between reliable and unreliable information. Like some people think, oh, historians, what they learn is these long lists of names of kings and battles. No, they don't. What historians go to university and they learn for years and years is how do I tell the difference between reliable and unreliable information? How do I know what happened in the 15th century during the print revolution in Europe? You need to learn the languages. You need to learn Latin and Greek and kind of 16th century German and English, which was different from English today.
Right.
You need to learn how to write handwriting from 500 years ago. And of course, you need to learn the difference. Just the fact that I found a book from the 15th century that said that witches stole penises from men. Is this true? Does it mean that in the 15th century there were really witches that stole? No, just because there is a paper from the 15th century that says it doesn't mean it's true. Now, how do you know? This is what you learn for 10 years. And this is also true of newspaper editors. You want to be a newspaper editor, you usually learn. You go to journalism school, and then you start as a simple journalist, and you slowly make your way up the ladder. And now, unfortunately, again, we have people who have no background in this, and they are managing the largest media companies in the world.
Right.
And when you tell them, you should not advance all these conspiracy theories and fake news, they honestly tell you, but how can I tell the difference? How can I know if it's true or not? Well, if you can't tell the difference, you're in the wrong business.
Doris says, in the United States, the First Amendment technically blocks the censorship of misinformation. John Kerry has suggested or floated a proposal about an idea of something called the Ministry of Truth.
It's not the business of the government is already the most powerful force in society. Making it also in charge of the truth is a very, very dangerous, proposition.
Yeah.
Again, this is checks and balances. You need the whole idea of, in dictatorship, all the power is concentrated in one place. You know, this is dictatorship. One person dictates everything. This one person dictates also what is the truth. In a democracy, the whole idea is a conversation between many people, institutions, organizations. And the government is the most powerful institution of all. So it should definitely not also be in charge of the truth. This is why we should have free press, and we should have academic freedom, and you should have independent courts, that each of these institutions is in charge of finding out the truth about different aspects of reality. Like, was the crime committed? So judges are the experts on finding the truth about that. The latest news from yesterday, this is the job of newspapers. What happened 500 years ago? This is the job of historians and archaeologists and so forth. And of course, again, there are problems in all these institutions because they are made of humans. And this is why you have many institutions. If you have corruption in the courts, so the media can publish it and can raise a public outcry. If there is racism in the newspaper business, so this is the job of sociologists or anthropologists to do research and show, look, there is a racist bias in the media. If there is a problem in academia, so again, you can go to the courts. And what happens if all of them are corrupt? Well, you know, nothing is perfect. People don't know how to build a perfect society.
Right.
We have to start with the assumption that everything is fallible. We do our best. This is, again, why we have these multiple institutions and checks and balances. If all the power is concentrated in one place, it's very easy to corrupt it.
Yep.
If it's spread between many institutions, we have a fighting chance, let's say.
Yes. Well, I think we've learned some valuable things today. Number one, what do witches do in their spare time? And number two, any, journalist of a paper worth their salt is going to end up being a dictator, I think. But thank you so much for joining us. Yuval Harari, guys.
Thank you.